or I'm sorry, 16, I forgot my reading glasses, so bear with me. 16th board meeting to order. At this time, I'd like to go around and do introductions of board members, administrators, and staff. And Suzanne, could you start us?
Suzanne Duck.
Matt Carenti, Director of Finance and Operations.
Chip Malcolm.
Jamie McCallum.
Brian Bauer.
Steve Orzek.
Laura Hartman.
Ellen Whelan-Weist.
Trisha Allen.
Joanna Dorian.
Barbara Wilson.
Wendy Baker. Ellie Rump.
Mary Heather Noble.
Jason Chance.
And in our audience,
Courtney Cron, Director of Teaching and Learning.
excellent, thank you. Next on the agenda is a motion to adopt the agenda. If I could have a motion?
So
Okay,
moved.
Suzanne and Jamie.
I'll move to approve the agenda as printed.
Okay, thank you. And what I'd like to do, on the sign-up sheet, how many do we have? I want to address the time allocation.
There are 6 on this sign-up.
And on Zoom, if you could raise your Zoom hand.
We've got 4 people who expressed interest, and everyone's got their hand up yet.
Okay, excellent. So I would like to propose that we allocate 20 minutes to the public comment. I think we should be able to get through that number, if that's okay with the board.
Yep.
Okay, so with that change, any objections to doing that? Then I'd like to approve the agenda as modified. So next up is our public comment period, and we encourage public comments. In doing public comments, we request that you first raise your, we'll read you off the sheet, which we're doing tonight. Please limit the comments to 3 minutes, and we will time you so that we can be fair to everyone, to be able to get through to everyone. Please know that this isn't a two-way dialogue. We're here to listen, and we definitely hear you, and we're listening, and we won't necessarily respond to questions, what have you, should you ask them during public comment, okay? Please refrain from making public comment about personnel or students, that kind of thing. And when you, we'll go through the list, if you could state your name and also the town that you reside in, that would be awesome. Okay, so let's start with the list, and the first one up, and we'll alternate between the Zoom and also in the room.
We have Renee.
Okay, excellent. And if you could just state your, just stand up, state your full name and the town.
Yes, my name is Renee McGinnis. I live in Moncton, and I am the policy analyst for Vermont Family Alliance. I testify to committees at the State House that are introducing and working on legislation that usurps parental rights and puts minors at risk of making adult decisions without their parents being involved. So according to Vermont statute, the age of majority is 18. I've been tracking a lot of legislation that lowers the age of consent for various adult decisions to the age of 12. The library use records confidentiality at 12 plus was one that was just recently passed at public libraries, not school libraries. So Vermont Family Alliance believes that the family is a sacred institution that no government entity or school entity is allowed to undermine. The parents have the sole authority over their parents. So it's not a question of whether or not parents and children need to have these kinds of discussions over gender, different family structures, what have you, but it's about who should be directing these conversations, and it really starts when the child and the parents are ready to have these kinds of conversations. I think ultimately, I would agree, I'm speaking out in support of the parents that have issues with these gender books being introduced in kindergarten. Ultimately, I don't think that according to state policy and state law, that the superintendent will accept the materials consideration to remove these books from the classroom as a part of the unit, you know, who we are. I can't remember what the name of the unit is, who we are. And then ultimately, if it comes to the school board, I don't see under current state law that you would be able to remove those books. But I just want to share with you that some of these laws, they violate constitutional law. There's a compelled speech doctrine, which prohibits public resources from being used to push a particular biased view on any issue. And so the compelled speech doctrine sets out the principle that government cannot force an individual or group to support a certain expression. So, I would invite parents to make sure they're looking into these books that parents are reading. I think it should be a policy that it should be a policy of the school board that schools should require that parents be notified about all the literature that's being taught to their children at every age level, especially in elementary school.
Thank you. Thank you. Online?
Emily Bissonette, go ahead.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Emily Bissonette. I live in Middlebury. I wanted to just first off thank the board for your hard work to keep our schools safe and enriching for all of our children. I want to voice my opposition to the current attempt to ban books at an ACSD school, and I want to affirm my support for the teacher who has these books in their classroom and for the principal of the school who supports the books and the teacher. Book bans, they overwhelmingly target books about race, racism, gender, sexuality, many of these by Black and LGBTQ authors, and this case is no exception. The 6 books that are the subject of this ban attempt acknowledge the existence of transgender and non-binary people. They explain in age-appropriate terms what different gender identities are, and they challenge some gender stereotypes. In one of the books, for example, there's confirmation that it's okay for a boy to like sparkles just as much as they like playing with trucks. Reading a book about the experience of being a boy or a man would not force me, a cisgender woman, to become a boy or a man. And reading books like this that acknowledge the existence of genders outside the binary, there's just simply no scientific basis that would change somebody's gender identity reading those. However, as a queer person myself, an ally, I have friends and family who identify outside of that gender binary, and I really know the positive impact that reading books about other people like you can have. Young people should have the right to see themselves reflected in their classroom and libraries books. And parents also have the right to guide their children's reading, no question, but parents should not be making decisions for other parents' children. Specifically, a small group of parents should not dictate what other people's children are allowed to read. So parents who do not want their children reading certain material can ask for their child to be removed from the classroom when those books are being read, but they should not be allowed to decide for everyone what children can and can't read in their classroom. Doing so would violate the rights of all the other children in that class and their parents. So I want to ask the superintendent and the board to firmly reject this proposed censorship and to continue to allow individuals and parents to make the decision about what they and their own children can read. Thank you very much for listening and for your consideration of my opinion.
Thank you so much. Okay, back to the room.
Rory.
My name is Rory MacDonald. I am I live in Cornwall, and I'm a 7th grader over at the Middlebury Middle School. I'm here to speak about the book ban. I know that everyone here uses their First Amendment right daily, as the First Amendment is what allows you to voice your opinion, like ACA people here are doing. Though, if the First Amendment right is often so important too, but not just to the people trying to ban this, it's so important too, but not just including the people trying to ban this book. It makes me wonder why they try to ban books. Books are an author's voice, their opinions, and such. To take this away would be violating their rights. Would be violating their rights. To speak freely and have their own opinions.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, back to Zoom. Fran?
Hi,
Hi, Fran.
my name is Fran Putnam. I live in Weybridge. I want to address the current issue of banning books at Mary Hogan School. Emily has said a lot of what I'm going to read, but I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm a retired early childhood educator. I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm sure that the parents who are asking for books to be removed from the curriculum are coming from a place of caring and concern for their children. Just as these parents want agency over what their children learn, other parents want a choice as well. But if the books are taken out of the curriculum, that will affect all of the children, no matter what their parents want. Most schools have a policy of giving alternative assignments when parents object to material. The parents can take advantage of that policy for their own children while allowing the rest of the class to learn the material that the teacher has chosen for the group. I sincerely hope that this issue can be settled amicably and that we do not become so stuck in our own positions that we do harm to the entire school system and the community at large. Now more than ever, we need to come together for our community and our children. I encourage the board to support keeping these books in the school curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Back to the room.
Dr. Brinkley.
I'm Jody Brakely, my pronouns are she and her, and I was a pediatrician, a general pediatrician in town, and then a developmental behavioral pediatrician for the whole span of 40 years. Now I'm retired. And I have just a little story to share. About 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, I went to a conference in Boston, and one of the sessions highlighted a young 8 or 9-year-old girl and her parents. So Mary had been born John, and that was interesting. And then the mother said, at preschool age, around 4 years old, Mary said, and already realized herself, that she had been born in the wrong body. And what really stuck with me is that Mary's friends, her age mates, who are also in preschool, said, John is so fun. She is so funny. And she has really fun toys and great parties. And so through their innocence, not being fogged up by our grown-up learnings and whatnot, these kids could just see clearly what was important. And in some ways, this discussion revolving around kindergarten is not so much about them being too young, because it's easier for them, I think, in many ways. They can just see what the issues are. So that's all I wanted to share, that it's not, that old idea of waiting and seeing what happens. That's now outmoded. We now know that it's better to just provide information and love and caring and reflective thinking and back and forth early rather than later.
Thank you so much. And back to Zoom.
Larissa, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm Clarissa. I'm a parent of a kindergartner at Mary Hogan Elementary, and I want to express my strong support for safe and affirming classrooms. I specifically request that the board does not ban the books that are under consideration for removal. We know estimates suggest 1 to maybe 3% of children and youth are trans, and 2.5 to 8.5% of children are gender diverse. So these children are not as rare as some people would be made to believe. They're not hypothetical. They live and they exist in our community. But these transgender and gender diverse youth are also 2 to 3 times more likely to report suicidality, depression, and anxiety. And studies show that 30 to 50% of transgender and gender diverse youth report attempting suicide. I think it's absolutely heartbreaking that such a large percentage of children this young have attempted suicide. It's unacceptable. And so I would argue that it's our moral duty as a learning community to protect these youth from really devastating impacts of discrimination and marginalization that lead to these alarming rates of suicidality. Every child deserves to feel valued, safe, and supported, and I think we have to take collective action to ensure that these young people, their lives aren't only preserved, but they're allowed to flourish. Critically, transgender and gender diverse youth with supported families and supported learning communities, they show normal rates of depression and only slightly more anxiety as compared to their cisgender peers. The more contexts like home and school and work in which youth can experience gender-affirming support, the less they experience depressive symptoms and suicidal ideation behavior. And so it's really necessary that they can receive support across multiple contexts. So school belonging, school safety, connection to teachers and adults are really protective factors. And research has shown that children who were more familiar with trans and gender nonconforming children in real life, they displayed more positive attitudes towards their gender nonconforming peers. And I think this has important implications for education. In order to improve children's attitudes toward gender nonconforming peers, teachers can expose children to media like books and television that include gender nonconforming characters. And doing this, teachers can be taking a really vital step towards fostering understanding, acceptance, and inclusion among all students. I think some might claim that kindergartners are too young to learn about these topics, but it's clear that our kids are already grappling with gender identity and social expectations from a very young age. The American Psychological Association states that for many children, identification with a gender begins around 2 years of age. I think it's incredibly valuable for our children to have the opportunity to question why, if you flip through any toy or clothing catalog, you see this gendered marketing really easily apparently. I think discussing gender identity and expression in the classroom, it's not only age appropriate, but it also benefits all children by promoting inclusivity, understanding, and critical thinking.
Thank you so much. I need to, your 3 minutes are up, sorry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, in the room.
We have Ed Wheeler.
Yes, thank you. I thank all the board members and others sacrificing their time for the benefit of our children and the future of our country. In 3 minutes, of course, I can't even begin to say what I would like to, but I just want to make an overall observation. For most of our history, education was looked at as with a large moral component, and that was mainly Judeo-Christian values. And then that was sort of replaced by a values-free education. We're just going to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, those kind of things, and try to avoid the controversy of different, like religious or moral perspectives. Now that's being replaced with a very humanist perspective, and the Judeo-Christian perspective is not being respected. So for that, and one other reason, because of technology, I really fear for the future of public education. Because if we can't be providing the same environment, the same messages to all these children when they come from different backgrounds. Something as basic as how many genders are there, and can a person actually change their biological gender? We don't agree on this. So for that, and also the technology, we can have small groups of people using the internet resources and things like that to educate our children, I feel that more and more public education is going to lose the support of the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
What town are you from?
Middlebury.
Okay, thank you,
Sorry.
thank you, thank you. Okay, next on the list.
Are we all,
Yeah, there's no one else that has their hand up.
we have Lindsay Hart, I think.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Hart. I live in Middlebury. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I really just came here to make sure that something was said, and it is being said, thank you, in support of the teachers and in support of having these books available to children at all ages, because the more knowledge children have, the better choices they will make as they get older, as they continue on their life's journey, and the earlier they can learn differences, the better, in my view. And I think that I appreciate the parents who feel worried about their children reading these books. Obviously, perhaps they could use this as a time to talk to their children about these issues and use it as a dialogue with their children rather than trying to ban the books, which will just make them much more exciting for everybody else. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Fuentes George. I live in Middlebury. I have 3 children who have come through the ACSD, and I'm also the director at the Teen Center. And I just wanted to share my appreciation for Franny Gould and the good work that she's doing. I think it's really important for all of our kids to understand that we live in a worldwide community of 8 billion people, and not everyone is going to be just like you, but we all deserve respect and to see ourselves reflected in our community. Anecdotally, I wanted to say that a lot of the teens that attend the Teen Center do identify as LGBTQ. A couple of years ago, we saw a really alarming rate of self-harm in a lot of those teens. And since I think the community as a whole has been putting in some effort to publicly demonstrate that we do love those teenagers, we do love these young people, and we do want them in our community, and we do support them, I have not seen anyone harming themselves this year. It's anecdotal, teens are complicated, there's a lot that goes into it. It's certainly not just that one issue for a lot of teens, but I guess I just want the community to understand that these are real people in our community, these are real families. When we're talking about transgender people, we're talking about parents in the ACSD, we're talking about kids, and I think coming from a place of understanding and teaching our kids to appreciate differences rather than be afraid of them is really something we should applaud. And I appreciate Franny Gould for going about it the right way. She let every parent know exactly what was happening. She's doing her job really well, and I appreciate how forward-thinking she is.
Thank you. Anyone else?
We're at 20 minutes.
Perfect.
That's the list.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your comments.
Yeah, I didn't sign up, but is there room for one more brief comment?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
And what town are you from, sir, and your name?
Yes, my name is John Watson. I live in Middlebury. I'm the parent of a transgender child. The transgender child is actually now 30 years old, so no longer kindergarten level. When my child was born as a boy, as a transgender woman at this point. When she was a year, 2 years old maybe, it was evident to me, although I didn't think anything about it at the time, that she exhibited behaviors that one ordinarily associates with the opposite gender. I've come to believe and understand that there is a continuum of gender manifestations that doesn't necessarily line up with biological sex. They're not the same thing. And to equate them misses, I think, what gender identity is about. My child didn't grow up thinking that she was born in the wrong body. It isn't necessarily true that someone who is born male needs to convert themselves in all respects to a female body. You can still exhibit traits, behaviors that typically, stereotypically correspond to the gender that you are physically associated with. That's okay. There are a lot of people like that. And I think that to ban literature, which recognizes that, and for that matter to remove consideration of the subject from the curriculum, is short-sighted. And I hope that that doesn't happen. We need not have a curriculum that advances transgender ideology simply to recognize that there are people with different positions on the spectrum of gender identity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Barb, there's one hand right here.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Don't be sorry. Could you stand up and state your name and the town you're from?
I'm really not good at public speaking,
Just
but
take some deep breaths. You'll be just fine.
well, I feel pretty strongly about this. I feel that
I'm sorry, do you mind just stating your name and your town first?
My name is Molly Saunders.
Thank you.
I live in Middlebury.
Thank you.
I think that children should have access to books with a diverse range of characters, and I just finished my first semester of my master's in social work, and the few thoughts I had was I was wondering whether by banning these books, because I know that the LGBT community is protected by discrimination laws, at least so as of now, they still are, and I wonder whether like Title IX of the Education Amendment, I mean that covers discrimination based on sex in public schools. So I'm wondering how that plays into the idea of banning books. And then also, like, I can't remember your name.
Rory.
Like what Rory said about the First Amendment, which the First Amendment covers freedom of speech and freedom of press. So I understand that I think parents do have the right to have a say over what their children read, but I don't think I don't know. Those are just some thoughts. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone who came out tonight and also participated on Zoom for their comment. And we will now continue with the agenda. Next up is a recommendation to approve the minutes of December 9th. Could I have a motion? A second? Okay, thank you, Steve.
I'm sorry, who was the first?
Chip.
Thank you, Chip.
Any comments?
I have a comment thanking our secretary for keeping very accurate record, especially in this situation where we're hearing public comment about a very specific subject. I think it goes well and it sits in the record. So thank you, Madam Secretary.
Yep. Here. Anyone else? If not, then I would indicate that the minutes are approved as submitted, unless there's an objection. Okay. Next, we have the approval of the ACSD bills. Chip?
There are none.
There are none. Oof, this is a
Well,
first.
we just met a week ago.
Okay, I know. Wow. Next, we have reported the student representatives.
Hi. So, yeah, Sophia's not here. I think she got into college and she decided, I'm not sure where, but that's, I think she's celebrating tonight or something. I don't know why she wouldn't want to celebrate here. But
I'm with you on that one.
Anyway, so a little update. SCORE, Student Coalition on Human Rights. I'm one of the co-presidents for that, and recently we finished up a canned food drive, which is great. We took your guys' suggestion. We collaborated with Mums and Mary Hogan. I went to Mary Hogan to pick up some of the cans, and it was really, really great involvement. So that was really exciting and a great way to connect the community. We also did Polar Express, which is fun up in Burlington, where you dress up as elves and hand out, I think, candy and stuff like that to kids up in Burlington. And yeah, coming up, obviously winter break. I think everyone's excited for that. We kind of have some tests, so the school is a little bit stressful the past couple of weeks, but I think things are ramping down. And yeah, that's pretty much all that's been going on.
Excellent.
Recently. Yeah.
Any comments or questions? Well, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Next up is the report of the superintendent. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Baker.
Thank you. First thing I would want to point you to is the letter in your packet from Principal Steele, who recommends the board again allows up to 15 students to attend MUHS under the choice provision, which would likely result in 7 openings for next year. You will need to make a motion to approve that if it is to your liking.
I move that we approve the recommendation that we offer 15 choice slots at the high school.
I'll second it. Okay. Any discussion? Go ahead, Jason.
I'm wondering if it makes sense to sort of even this out so you don't have a chunk of 7 kids coming in, or if that's doesn't matter at all.
I think typically allowing up to 15 students is standard practice, and it depends. Students at high school age that are coming to take these slots vary, and sometimes not even for a whole year. So I think this is a pretty standard practice that's worked among the 3 high schools. But we could talk more about.
If you were one of the students who there were only 2 slots in your year,
mm-hmm.
It just seems unfair that you kind of get screwed that you don't have a slot.
Yeah, I don't imagine it's like that, but we could watch it and see.
And go ahead,
Dr. Baker. Do you happen to know? Is it typically the majority of this are all freshmen coming in taking these slots, or are there older siblings coming in as well, or?
In terms of students who are starting as freshmen versus starting throughout a different time of the year.
Is it likely that those 7 slots would all be going to freshmen, or historically, is there any history of siblings coming in or things like that?
I don't know the history associated with MUHS relative to that, so that would be something I'd want to ask Caitlin to report on for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add that.
Go ahead, Steve, and then Chip.
And we're also a sending school for Hannaford. And so a lot of people come in to take advantage of those programs. There are several distinctive things that we only do in our junior and senior year that are very attractive to some people. For example, Virgins had a lot of people that would transfer in to do the Walden program, which was limited to juniors and seniors. So I think it's a very similar situation here. That's why the weight of the choice slots go to juniors and seniors, upperclassmen.
Any other comments? We have a motion on the floor, so I'm going to go ahead and call it unless I see another hand. All those in favor of approving the school choice of 15 recommendation from Caitlin Steele, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, it's been approved.
All right, so the next we have personnel appointments and resignation, 1 resignation and 1 appointment. You usually like to read these into the record, so go ahead and suggest you do that.
I make a motion to accept the resignation of Samuel Stannard, a Brown's technician, effective 11/29/24, and to appoint Derek Coombs, wrestling coach, effective 12/16/24.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Jamie, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of accepting the resignation, as so read by Suzanne, please indicate by saying aye.
An appointment.
Appointment, oh, an appointment.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, Laura. Okay.
All right,
Back
so-
to you.
Sure, the bulk of the remainder of the superintendent's report, has to do with budget building, right, which we're doing together. So tonight, we'll give a little bit of an overview as to where we are, and then Matt will lead us into tax information. And then we will talk a little bit about some of the things that we're learning and thinking about relative to what we're affectionately referring to as Block 3, which is kind of our core requirements block, and we'll begin to take you through some staffing models that relate to enrollment projections for the academic year 25-26. So we'll tag team this a little bit as we go. In the first slide, you have this in your board pack as well. Just as an opportunity to update you as to where we are in the process. So even from the Finance Committee meeting this afternoon, we've done a ton of work pulling from Matt's spreadsheets and principal requests and so on and so forth to begin to fill out our stacks here. You see, remember, the block 1 is the operations stack. That's our infrastructure, and as you'll see a little later on today, Matt's also added the district operations to that, like fiscal operations, contingencies, legals, executive, the superintendent's salary goes there. You have to have that, sorry. And then you have, the Block 2 tuition, which is unchanged from when you've seen it before. Block 3 gen ed requirements, those relate to all the required things we have to have based on state and federal regulations for general education, as well as board policy, class size, things of that nature. The fourth block up, well, that's handy, very nice. Where Matt's dot is there, is basically our gen ed supplies and services. Fifth block are specialized services. Those relate to any services that we are legally required to provide relative to students living with disabilities through IEPs, 504s, or other specialized services that relate to that we may be extending to a broader brush of students. Block 6 is student opportunity. You'll see extracurriculars there, Camp Key Wade-In, field trips, things like that. And then is that salmon? A deep salmon, perhaps? Wild salmon?
Wild salmon.
We have equity supports, and that block really relates to student success data and goals that each building has identified as student performance needs, so our supports there are related specifically to moving the needle in student performance. And then the gray on the top are the uncategorized funds. Those are the only ones we have left to put in any of our buckets related to the 2% feasibility target that you gave us. So you can see we've been very busy. Matt was in the office all day today, and so his fingers were busy, cutting and pasting, and we were working through a lot. The next step with this, and then this will be true of everything that you see tonight, will be to review it with the District Leadership Council, which are the program leads in the district office and also all the building principals, to make sure, because we are taking the furniture out of the house, putting it on the lawn, right, and now putting it back in, and in some cases in some different rooms, and we want to make sure that we've got everything where it needs to go. So in doing that, we have incorporated reductions in student services, contingency funds, basically all the things that we've talked about so far, we have incorporated in here. So when we meet again on the 6th, we'll have a spending plan for you, where we can talk about what the implications of all that is and where these dollars are going, and the differences that they'll make with kids and the strategic plan achievements that we're hoping to gain from that. So I just wanted to make sure you had an overview of kind of where we are. You got to celebrate with us that our tower is being populated well, and you can see we're well on our way to getting things right. We may move a couple things as we go. The hope is that this model is one that we can continue to use for a number of years. And so it's important that our whole leadership team really understands where everything goes and what that feels like and looks like, so we're able to proceed in the same vein together. So that's why we're doing that together.
I just have a really quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. If you could just speak to, just really briefly, how this process has gone with the leadership team, and just how significant the changes have been, and how people have been able to wrap their brains around the sort of moving out, moving back in, reorganization of the budget.
Yeah, I think generally it's produced the whole range of human emotions. I think it has put people back into student performance data, which I think has been welcome. And the building principals have found, I think, time to really talk with their staff about student performance data and what that looks like and what solutions might be in place, because I asked them to go ahead and think about what they would need in order to attend to the student data without constraint. Just what do you need? I think that's a different way of thinking for them, and I think generally speaking, that's been positive. I think in terms of new era, we're leaving some of the pandemic pieces behind and moving into a new era. And what does that mean? I think that probably creates a little bit of anxiety. Focusing on our universal instruction as opposed to quite as much recovery effort, more let's be proactive. I think that carries with it both a sense of yes, that's what we should do, and oh gosh, what about the other things? So that's kind of a mixed response. I think everyone has appreciated being able to know more and have input. I don't know for sure, but I don't think the district budget has usually been generated with this much input and transparency among the leadership team. Some of the slides that you'll see today, I'm fairly certain that they will say that's not the way that's been done before in terms of looking at how all that's working, and the idea of distributing resources in an equitable fashion. It's just not where you've been before, right? Because this was your goal this year, so it's a change for the district, and I think that is something that's been very welcome. That said, we're building the plane while we're flying it, and we're shifting things, and it's been, as much as I begged the board's patience, the administrators have been patient with that as well, and particularly Matt, he puts something somewhere and it's like, oh, that probably ought to go to this other place. Okay, we put it in the other place, right? So that said, Courtney and Matt and Nicole all took some deep training in this, and they've continued throughout the year, and we're really able to put this in place and put it in place in ways that I think even advance other practices in Vermont, and I think the team generally feels pretty good about that. Anything else, Courtney or Matt, that might be worth mentioning since you're here?
I just have one quick aside, which is that in the spirit of putting the furniture back in the room, if you all wanted to scoot up and get closer to the TV, a little less. I feel like you're too far away now. So feel free to scoot your chairs up.
Steve,
Okay. Okay, Joanna, and then you had your hand up, right? And then Steve.
I just was curious what tool or tools you were using with the principals in terms of the student outcomes.
So
what are you looking?
I suggested to them that they could use any data they wanted. Yeah. And we've talked about the VTCAP data, but they also have FAST data, and they have end of unit math assessments and literacy data that they're using, and the high school graduation data has been a primary focus. It really is about what is the data that is consistent with student success that you're seeing with your teams that really needs our attention. And make a presentation about that, and make a presentation about how it is that you feel you can make a difference in that as we're moving ahead. What resources do you need? And so I left it open-ended enough like that, which is both maddening and celebratory, right? It's easier if somebody just tells you what to do. So they have risen to this occasion well, and they will all be here, I believe, on the 6th with you, so that you can ask them those kinds of questions, as a whole. I think next year probably this process will be much easier for them. They had to be very creative and constructive this year in terms of figuring out what that looked like when they said, well, what form would you want this in? Whatever form you'd like to give it to us in, right? You can just imagine all of that, which is both wonderful and hard at the same time. So I really respect their efforts, and I'm grateful for their good humor. Yeah.
Steve.
Just a few pedantic things. The bar and all of its multicolored fascination doesn't meet $50 million, which is the current budget. Does this mean that we are cutting back from level? And so I have a question about that, and then I would like some clarification about the uncategorized funds. Those are planning on being spent. It's not like we have another 1.8 out there that we're not going to spend.
Oh, no,
These
they'll
are-
go into those buckets. They're
Okay,
just not quite
okay,
there yet.
okay.
Yes. Yeah, we just haven't had a chance to put them in where they go quite yet, in that case.
And it's not from sitting too far away, Matt. I have it right here.
Yeah.
It doesn't meet 50 million.
The FY25 fund balance transfer was part of that 50 million, and we backed that out because there's no comparability between that fund balance and the one that we're going to be up against this year. So we took all of the fund balance out of the equation for now.
Okay.
And that's why it dropped, because that was a $2.03 million fund balance.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Matt has been doing a really great job to make sure we're not spending money we actually don't have in this process, which has been really wonderful.
Somebody's got it.
Yeah.
Looking back over the years, I'm refreshed by how we're doing it this year. The state reached a crisis point last spring with so many budgets going down, and part of that was the system that was thrown at us at different levels. And in order to compensate for that, I think we're doing it the right way, to going back, us personally in ACSD, to look at it very finitely in ways that Wendy's talked about. And I feel very comfortable with the way we've done it. I know why we did it the other way before, because that made sense too. And like you've said, we may revert a little bit to that depending on what happens, both statewide and this budget itself, does it work. But I think it's been very helpful, and I appreciate it, honestly. I know it's a tremendous amount of work, but the furniture on the lawn, I think, is a great analogy, honestly, because we all know some things are standing lamps and some things are bureaus, so.
I think one of the nice things about this is that, we've combined the strategy of fiscal responsibility that zero-based budgeting provides, right? Where you really are looking at everything to determine, is this something that we need now? And equity-based allocation, so that the way we're communicating and thinking about it, we had this really wonderful conversation today at the Finance Committee meeting, who's been wonderful in helping give us feedback about where we are and what we need to think about around opportunities, which is the 6th block. And as we're starting to think about those kinds of things, and what was wonderful about it was that as we began to show some of our thinking with them and ask their help, they said, you know what, there's so much more we could talk about related to this student opportunities. And that's true, and you can't if it's not visible to you. Right. And so part of the rationale for doing this in a way that really allows for more equitable discussion of resource allocation is when it becomes more transparent. Otherwise you don't necessarily see what is or isn't there. And even though we may not make all of those progress pieces this fiscal year, it sets us up to have these good conversations, you know, year after year. So it's been a good process. We'll be probably pretty happy to get to the end of it, Matt, right? But it's been something that's pulled us all together around all learning something new, I think, and that's been a benefit.
We start FY27.
Yes, yes. All right, so now we're going to talk about some tax things, I think, and then we're going to revert back to the $20 million thing there. We're going to try to unpack a little bit of that. Just there are some pieces that I think you'll find interesting there.
So we put tax first because it's earlier in the night and everyone's hopefully more alert. We're going to need to be because we're going to talk about taxes. We're going to talk about the CLA. We're going to talk probably more than we should have to about the statewide adjustment factor, which is this new thing that's going to play a role in how the budget's presented and marketed to the public, but doesn't actually have an effect on anything. You might remember that from the drivers. But first things first, the property yield and yield letter came out. As a quick refresher for anyone who needs it, yield is best thought of as a unit of measurement, which is calibrated every year by the state in order to help school districts set tax rates. Every yield that a district spends per weighted pupil adds $1 to the district tax rate. So this year our tax rate is about $1.50, and that's 1.5 yields that we spend per LTWADM. If the yield goes down, we would spend more yields if the yield is valued less, and our tax rate would go up. Similarly, if the yield goes up, the tax rate goes down. So that's kind of the effect that the yield has on taxes and how you get that $1 of tax rate from one yield. Okay. The December 1st letter from the tax commissioner came out. This sets the statewide homestead property yield, income yield, and non-homestead property rate at $8,553 for homestead, $12,260. So this would be if you're paying on income, as 2/3 of Vermonters do. Some or all of their taxes are paid through income. That's the income yield. So every $12,000 of income is one yield and $1 of tax. Statewide non-homestead rate at $1.79. So that's every business, second home, or other non-homestead pays $1.79. Now we put up top that this comparison is inaccurate because that 8553 has been adjusted by the new statewide adjustment factor. We're going to get to that later. I did throw a quick slide in here to mention that the excess spending threshold is also just recalculated and using a new inflation factor and a new AOE finance person, we got a new number. And so we were on, in the previous estimate on the other side, on the right side of the threshold. This new estimate has us actually on the wrong side of the spending threshold. We don't estimate that that's going to be a problem or anything that we really need to wrestle with at this point in time because our spending plan is heading towards a lower per pupil, but it's just something to point out as we move forward. So, statewide adjustment. Under Act 183, the state uses an adjustment factor to make the pre-CLA property tax rate look more like the post-CLA property tax rate. Everybody's property has gotten more valuable in the last few years, and so this idea that the CLA was going to be a little tweak here, a little tweak there, really wasn't fitting anymore. Everybody was seeing a huge increase in their tax rate because the CLAs showed that their town's property values were really out of whack with what the assessed values were, and those haven't caught up yet. And so the state said, instead of making it seem like the CLA is amplifying everybody's taxes drastically, let's take the average CLA and pre-apply it to everything so that it raises everybody's rate by the statewide average, and then make a second adjustment on a town-by-town basis, that's more that minor tweak that the CLA is supposed to be. And so it's a little bit of a mathematical gymnastics exercise, but it does reduce that sticker shock effect of the post-CLA town tax rates. So 28% behind actual market rates is where our property values are, or our assessments are right now. This gives us that 72% statewide adjustment factor. So that's applied throughout the tax rate calculations. It's applied at each step. And as we'll see when I show the equation, it kind of goes in and then comes out. Because the yield of 85.53 has the adjustment in, we wanted to look at what it would be like if we took that out, so that we had comparability between 25 and 26. And so to do that, you just divide by that 72%, back that out, and you get the FY26 rate with no adjustment factor of close to $12,000. If we compare that to the FY25 rate of 98.93, we see that the yield, even though it looks smaller, is actually 20% bigger than it was last year. A bigger yield means lower tax rates, which is good. So
one of the things that's important about that is that that is calculated based on the state's understanding of what district spending is going to look like across the state. It is not our district's intent to change our spending plan relative to how much we might be able to spend in order to meet up to where we think the taxpayers' capacity is, but it's going to be important that everybody is taking an approach that is that way. The state could change the yield if they.
This is a prediction.
If they wish, the
legislature is responsible for the yield bill, which, as we saw last year, can drag out and be really dramatic and change a lot of things. And so this is not a hard and fast number. It's certainly not something that, as Dr. Baker said, we're taking as green light to spend as much money as possible.
Right. But it does look favorable.
So 2 years ago, this is how town tax rates were calculated. Per pupil spending divided by the property yield would give us an equalized district tax rate. That district tax rate was divided by each town's individual CLA to get the town tax rate. As of last year, we also added a discount depending on how you were disproportionately affected by the new weighting under Act 183. This year, we're doing the same thing, but with this statewide adjustment factor kind of popping in and popping out all over the place. So in the first part of this calculation, right over here, you can see that the statewide adjustment factor is in here. It's actually already been baked into that yield. So when we saw 85.53, that's the statewide adjustment factor already in that part, that fraction. On this side of the equation, we see our tax rate discount also needs to be adjusted by the yield, so we're going to make sure that we do that. And then over here, we're going to take our discounted and equalized tax rate and then back the statewide adjustment out when we add in the town CLA, and that's going to give us a town tax rate. If that is confusing, don't worry. There's a real number example at the end of this presentation which shows that it does create an equivalent tax rate. Okay? Now the discount. So we have a shrinking discount that goes down by 20% every year. We were 13% disadvantaged by the weighting last year. Based on the 4 decimal point system that the state uses, that 13 turns into 10 this year. And we need to adjust that, so we're going to do that. We have 13 turning into 10. Then we take that 10 and divide it by the statewide adjustment of 72%. and it turns back into 13.
Hmm.
Hey,
Magic.
actually 13.8, so our discount winds up going up a little bit by way of the state adjustment, which isn't going to make a difference in the end, but that's just what it is. Okay, so we have our adjusted discounts. Next, we need to determine our per pupil education spending, starting with the LTW ADM. We just received the preliminary LTW ADM, which is, again, our weighted pupil count using the 2-year average enrollment and then subsequent grade level weights and sparsity, as well as this year's poverty and English language student counts with their respective weights. So here's a quick refresher. This you might remember from the drivers. If we have 1 pupil, 3 pupils, that would be enrollment. And then we're going to take that average over 2 years. Next, we think about the grade level weights. So high school students get the most weight, middle school get the next weight, and elementary students are not weighted at all. Pre-K actually get negative weight because they don't go to school all week. And then we add demographics in at the end, so whether a student is an English language student or a student living in poverty, that would be the last piece. So average enrollment, grade level, poverty, English language, and sparsity is how we get our pupil count. Here's a summary of those weights and our counts for this year. So the first piece is on the right-hand side, that LTADM, that is our 2-year average daily membership. LT meaning long-term, so it's 2 years. That's our base weights. We don't give elementary students the 1.0 because that's already part of the base weight. We do take away 0.54 for each pre-K student, so that's where we get that minus 88. And then we add 0.36 and 0.39 for every middle and high school student. So that's how we get this weight. Every FPL student in the district gets an additional 1.03, giving us this weight over here. Every ELL student gets an additional 2.49. We have 23 as our count this year for an additional 57. We also are a low sparsity district, which means we get a 0.07 applied to all of our LTW ADM for an additional weight of 118. Adding all of these weights up, we get 27, 60, 18. If we want to think about how that looked last year, here's our year-to-year change. We can see a slight uptick in pre-K weights, slight uptick in middle school weight, slight downtick in high school weight, huge uptick in poverty-based weight. This is something that we have a close eye on because it doesn't not make sense to us. We know that we had a data issue in FY25's budget development, which blocked some of our direct certification data from being realized on the state census. And so we were expecting to see a bump. We're just kind of holding until we get the second version of LTW ADM to have a ton of confidence here. But by and large, we're going to see a good number, or good increase, and that's carrying a lot of extra weight that we didn't have last year. Right now, it's at about 11% increase. That's likely to go down because of some mathematical issues in the formula with AOE they're working through, but I don't think it's going to go down too much. It's hard to say tonight where exactly that's going to land.
Quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm curious, I think we all understand and have been told that a large part of this increase is also related to the number of older students that we have, like the larger classes of high schoolers and stuff. Have you just, this would be really nerding out, I understand, but I'm just wondering about anticipating the next few years and when our classes start to get smaller again, what kind of impact that will have on our...
So it's a 2-year average, right? And last year we had fewer high school students than this year, so year one of the 2-year average is sort of an anchor.
Yeah.
And we're losing out on weight because we have to include last year with this year. If we
Gotcha.
have a strong year next year, as in matching this year or better,
Right.
then we will see a good
An
good increase as we shed the last year's weight
Smaller
in favor of
class.
a better year
Right.
next year. So it's hard to say right now, but I think that this year we did see a good uptick in high school numbers. As you can see here, though, it's just about even in terms of the weight year to year. So I would expect to see that tick up next year if we have a good, or at least a stable enrollment.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, like kind of the 3 years ahead, just kind of realistically what we're thinking. Anyway, sorry. Thank you.
Depends how many houses they build.
I'm so sorry, Steve, go ahead.
So this is an agglomeration of the entire district, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, this is all the students that we have. When the AOE sends you that number, do they break it down by school or community?
Town of residence.
Town of residence. So we do know what that is.
We do know how many students come from each town of residence.
How many students or how much weight?
Well, both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they know that student X is going to the Mary Hogan School, lives in Middlebury, and provides this much weight to our formula.
Correct.
Okay.
Suzanne.
Matt, do these numbers in the high school also include our 15 school choice students? Because funding doesn't follow them, isn't that correct?
Right. Funding does not follow them because it's reciprocity, so they don't pay tuition to us, and we don't pay tuition if we send kids to other schools. So,
But we do count them, I believe, and they count ours.
But do we have 15 going out and 15 coming in? I mean, is it kind of like an even swap, or do we have 15 in and 5 out?
I can look into that. It's one of those things that kind of, there's an answer, but I don't know.
Okay. Just curious.
I know that state place students are tacked on every year. They don't get averaged in, and so every year it's a 2-year average plus state place. I do not know where school choice falls in that. I have to believe though that because there's no exchange of revenue and expense based on sending, that the
reason I asked
that the
was-
student would get counted in their district of residence.
I think that's
Because
what
there's-
I've read in the past. That's what I remember.
That's and don't quote me on that, but that's where my
Yeah, see, I thought at one point the students, they were all, so whatever students were in the building, whether they were ours or not, they're counted here. But I didn't know with this new funding rules and everything, if they snuck us a
That's what I
change in there or
remember
something.
too, but it also may have changed over time, so we'll just update you on it, we'll get the actual information and then.
That would be great, instead of us kind of surmising.
Cause we have all kinds of other things to share, that you'll wanna know about, so it's a good reminder.
It's just when we need more things to.
All right, I won't ask any more questions.
All right. So now that we've done all of those first steps, we have what we need to create a preliminary district tax rate. It's going to be equalized, discounted, and adjusted.
It's like a bumper sticker.
Yep.
Okay, so step 1 is going to be to calculate our per pupil ed spending. We're going to start with our FY25 ed spending, which is all of our spending, that almost 50 million, minus our state and federal revenues. So census block grant gets backed out, Title I, Idea B, merger grant, all of those things. That gets us down to our education spending. This is the taxpayers need to raise in order to fund the school budget. That's that 40 million number. We've also set a feasibility target that says let's keep that at a 2% increase, which gives us 40.8 million to spend this year. Now, we have our projected LTWADM of 2760. We divide the ed spending by the weighted pupils, and we get $14,797 in per pupil ed spending, which is a drop of 8%.
Wow.
Okay.
Awesome.
Now, the next step is going to be to divide by the adjusted yield. So we take that, and we divide it by the adjusted yield, 8553, you might remember that from the first slide. And that gives us a pre-discount rate of $1.73. Then we take our adjusted discount and factor that in, so that's gonna drop it down to $1.59. So now we have an adjusted, discounted, and equalized rate of $1.59. Now, we wanna create comparability, because this is where we would stop and put it on the ballot for voters, and we would say, your tax rate was $1.50 last year, and it's gonna be $1.59 this year, vote for this tax rate. What we're not saying in that is that it's actually gonna make your taxes go down because of this state adjustment factor, and that's the tricky part. That's why we're harping on all of this, is because we don't have comparability until we crosswalk that $1.59 to say, what is that in FY25 dollars? So to do that, we want to take that $1.59, and we're gonna do the same calculation using our pre-adjustment projected yield, that almost $12,000 yield. If we run the same calculation using that $12,000 yield, we get a discounted, unadjusted rate of $1.25. So this year, our district tax rate is $1.49. And if it were to wind up being essentially $1.25, that would be a 16.5% decline in property tax rate. Even though on the ballot, it would look like it was 9 cents more. So that's the mental gymnastics that we need to wrap our heads around in order to get behind this budget this year. The good news is that we're going in the right direction, and that, you know, if we can stay in that direction, we will deliver a budget that meets our strategic goals and helps bring tax rates down. So the CLA adjusted town tax rates are the next step, or the last step. We're waiting on the town-by-town CLAs to get released, and those should be out soon. We stopped short of giving them to you based on preliminary CLAs because there's a lot of flux, and we didn't want to introduce more flux by using yet another number that we don't have total confidence in. So we're going to get confident in LTWADM as we get a second or third version of those. We're going to get confident in yield as we move towards the yield bill being passed, and we're using not just a projection but an actual bill. We're probably going to have the budget go to the voters before that happens, but again, sometimes there are multiple versions that are released, and so we'll have a second or third data point on that. And we'll have the new CLAs by town. And so as we get that data, we'll update the town tax rates and publish a projection for each town based on where we're at, okay? What I did put in here is from the state's website, which if you want further reading on any of this, they've published some resources. This is one chart which I thought was helpful. It compares the current law to the new law. It assumes a school district spends about $15,000, or exactly $15,000 per pupil. Under the current law, there is no adjustments. They used 75% in their example. And you can read the rest and work through it. The punchline being that final homestead tax rate where you wind up with $250 as the tax rate in either case, no matter which way you get there. And so that's what we'll be doing with our own tax rate as we move forward, and trying to coach people through it so that they have a clear understanding of what they're looking at and how we got there.
Question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ellen.
Matt, is the statewide adjustment, I feel like you said this, but can you remind us, this, it says that the statewide adjustment would be starting July 1st, 2025. is that current, has that been passed, or is that pending legislation that would have to get passed in the 2025 session?
No, it's passed. That was,
Yeah.
that was
It's just
actually
not
made
taking,
for-
it's just not taking effect until
Effect until-
July of
yep.
2025. Okay,
'Cause
so
it's gonna
that's,
hit
it's
the
definitely
next
going to
tax.
happen. Is there a
Yes.
reason why they have this the statewide adjustment at 75%, but you were using 72?
Yeah, well, they hadn't determined what the statewide adjustment
Got
was
it, so
when they
it'll be
published this.
72.
It's
This
it's
was an
72, yeah.
example.
Yeah. I think that, you know, they redid all of the statewide property data and, you know, just did a deeper dive into that to get to that 72%.
Matt, do we, remind me, when does the CLA by town numbers come out? Are we expecting that like in January, before we publish?
Off the top of my head, I felt like it was the 15th, but I haven't seen them come out
Okay.
today or yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So I think imminently, but not yet. So. Any other questions on tax stuff before we move ahead to?
Go ahead.
What's your professional opinion about how best to
Explain this?
explain this to taxpayers in a way that's like,
Yeah.
absorbable?
Yeah. Well, how does the school board interface with taxpayers?
Yeah, I mean,
We could elicit our visitors who've stayed through the meeting.
Yeah.
And they'll understand it completely.
What other districts have done, and you know, especially in districts that struggle to pass a budget and really need to play a lot of offense, is to come up with you know, multifaceted approach. You could, you know, use web and print resources to create an educational campaign that helps people wrap their heads around this and breaks it down into digestible bites. You could create, I think, what's called like budget champions, and have sort of a core group of interested members of the public get a training session so that they can evangelize the nuances of ed finance on our behalf. You have, I think it's really important to remember that principals talk to families more than anybody, and making sure that our principals have a really clear understanding of what's going on is always a good idea. I think if you do all that, that's what you can do.
Go ahead, then I'll talk.
I think the question for me too is also, at the end of the day, no one's gonna follow this, and nor should they have to, right? Like, the process of getting to the numbers is inexplicable and fine. But people are going to wonder, particularly this year, what's gonna happen to my tax bill? Like I don't really care how we get to it, but tell me what it looks like when that bill comes. So I think, however, once they're final numbers, the job that we have to do as a board, and then figuring out the right ambassadors and the way that you message this, both through the medium and the message, but it's just, you know, both, this is what we're all investing in, this is what our schools do, and this is why they're important. You know, it's the positives of the investment that we all make as taxpayers, and then it's also, and here's what the bill is gonna look like, to the extent that we're able to. And that's the piece that I'm not even gonna keep asking questions about, because it feels so, like, such a moving target. But until we can explain that to as precise a degree as possible, knowing the yield bill won't have come out, you know, there's still gonna be guesses or estimates that are part of this. That's, I think, our job this year.
Yeah, and one thing that comes to mind, I know, at least for the rural towns, like in Shoreham, they insert several pages of the budget book. And so I think, you know,
in their town meeting material.
in their town, yeah, and they send that out to everyone in the entire town. So I'm thinking that we really need to make sure that what they're inserting there really is, to Ellen's point, really talking about town specific, you know, at least showing, well, this is, you know, what it is estimated to be. So I think they have an opportunity there to, you know, really utilize the fact that they still include that information to make sure it's structured in a way that it gets to what Ellen was saying to some extent, cause that does go to every household, at least in my town it does. It doesn't, no,
No, in Bridgeport, you have to ask for one to be printed, and then you have to go pick it up.
okay, yeah, go ahead, Chip.
Yeah, and I think another thing, going back to Mary Heather's question, to Matt, is I think we should also popularize that, or not popularize, promote the idea of how the budget was created.
Yes.
That it was different, not that we did it wrong in the past, but that you are doing it in a different way to find out what our needs are that are going to satisfy what our goals are, including all of the things about equity.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because a lot of times that's, well, you just add a number onto another number, and you never really looked at whether you need that or not.
Yeah.
And you know, how we promote that in fact that's happened, well, I guess that type of logic people have to come up with that sort of talking points about it. But I think that's really important, and I think this has been a important year for us to be able to say, we've done it this way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And I'm sure John has it all in 100, 200 words.
Yeah, I was
figured
just
out.
thinking.
I hope I'm not out of line, but I'd like to say that we would certainly, we always do budget stories in advance of town meeting and would welcome any kind of op-ed that you'd like to
Right.
submit to increase public's comprehension.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, John.
Sure.
So, if we're all okay changing gears, we're gonna switch from taxes and back into some stack conversations. We saw the whole thing in sort of a rough draft at the top of the presentation, but here we're gonna just dig into 1 and 3 with a little bit more detail. The updates to 1, here's the whole thing again. The main update to 1 was that we had district office in 3 the last time, and we moved it to 1. And so we wanted to make sure that we presented that change, and then a little bit of detail on the district office budget as well. So the district office budget is projected to drop by 7% this year. This is mainly due to the transfer of the Director of Teaching and Learning to the PD and curriculum budget, which is in Block 3. This is a summary of the expenses within the district office budget, and there are 3 function codes which separate all of the district office expenses into 3 main categories. We have the school board, the district administration, or the superintendent's office, and then the finance team, fiscal services, which also includes payroll and HR. The school board spends almost all of their budget on insurance.
Yeah.
And not enough on salary and benefits.
Yeah, right.
We also have some small, subscription VSBA type things and other services, which would be legal and the auditor, I believe, is also in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The superintendent's office, district administration, holds a lot of holds the main contingency fund for the budget, which is, by our auditor's recommendation, calibrated at 1% of the general fund. Anything from 2 to 4 is kind of a safety zone. So we definitely have a skinny contingency, but we're also backed up by some other reserve funds in the case of a true emergency. The fiscal services team is largely salary and benefits related to the business office and payroll and HR staff. On the right, you can see how all that stacks up by type to yield that total district office budget. So that was the quick amendment to 1, and now we're going to move on to 3, which is the most important staffing block of the stack, in the sense that it's the largest one, It represents the core personnel, as we've called them, a couple other names that flying around, but the mandatory or required personnel for each school operation, as well as the professional development curriculum cost center.
Do you want me to do this one?
Yeah.
So, there are a couple things that you'll see here that will represent different strategies, and we'll talk more about these when we're together on the 6th. They come out of the strategic plan. So you'll see here that each of the Middlebury schools have a student response coordinator position that's added to them. That repurposes some resources that were in the student services budget. In some cases, it's a position that Mike Dudek is piloting at Mary Hogan in an effort to really develop a database student response approach that helps to ensure that the way in which we're handling student conduct is in alignment with the goals of the strategic plan. And also, these positions will give way to the development of some restorative practices and some restorative justice work at the high school level, which is also related to your strategic plan in the goal of belonging. That relates to a human-centered approach, in terms of working with students and their families. So you'll see those. Health, FTE, it modeled at all schools. You'll see an addition of a health teacher at the high school. That there's part of that is also allocated for Mary Hogan, and you'll see an additional health teacher at MUMS, and you'll see some repurposed PE staff in the K through 5 smaller schools that will remain to be able to add some additional health instruction. We'll talk about that when we look at a chart in a minute. That relates to the implementation of your wellness policy that is new, that also calls for the implementation of comprehensive health standards that are allocated. So that is not something that we are currently staffed to do. And that staffing allows us to build a team that will be able to implement those health requirements and that wellness policy in full. We talked about a strategy of some budget reallocation and reduction around not carrying vacant general ed paras that we've not been able to hire for a number of years. 4 of those come out of MUMS, 4.5 come out of Mary Hogan. Elementary class sizes are optimized at 15.5 throughout, which I know you're interested to see more about, probably. So those are on the next chart. There are fewer classroom teachers at Ripton. Cornwall, although we're hedging a bet there a little bit, Mary Hogan, Shoreham, and Bridport due to incoming enrollments, which you'll see. And there's a slight reduction in AMS related to FTE, although Courtney actually helped me see an error in one of our charts that I want to be sure to point out. I'm quite certain the principals will point out others, when we're together on Thursday as we bring the pragmatics to things, in that, with Spanish, we need to add a little bit more than we have based on kids having Spanish twice a week instead of once.
Could you define AMS for people?
Yes, arts, movement, and Spanish.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I felt very proud as a new superintendent when I could do that independently. It's an Addison Central acronym. These charts use staffing formulas to create equivalents. We talked a lot about comparability and staffing equivalents as we've gotten to think about the FY25 budget. And so a true equity-based budgeting strategy involves staffing rules. Those of you that went to the Vermont School Boards Association presentation heard Burlington talk about their staffing rules and how that was an important part of their equity-based piece. So some of these were sort of in place before, and then these are staffing rules that we will be talking through with the principals in the District Leadership Council on Thursday to make sure that we're not missing anything. As I said, language, we need to make an adjustment in. A lot of these work by classrooms. So if you reduce a classroom in a building, then you have fewer sections of art or fewer sections of general music. In these staffing rules, you'll see, for example, that music, general music at the K-5 level is in there as a requirement. In the student opportunity bucket, there will be chorus and band that is in the K-5. Now, the principals, when we get with them, they may have other ideas about that, right? So we'll work on those things together to make sure that we're presenting something to you that they feel good about, they understand, and we can carry forward in, and we'll get your feedback when we come together on the 6th. So I think that the rest of that is fairly self-explanatory and maybe easier to understand when we take a look at some charts, which are the next piece, I think.
Segued yourself.
Did I?
Yes.
Segued myself. Okay, so here, and I think, Matt, if you click one more time, do you get the ones that were there from last year? Yeah, so here you'll see where there is projected enrollment in the blue section of the chart for FY25. There you go.
Trying to make it bigger for.
Yeah.
It's hard to see.
So you see the outgoing classes in terms of the 5th graders and the incoming classes. Projected enrollments and numbers of classrooms. It's important to note that that Bridport, Shoreham, Weybridge will all be 3 classroom schools next year. K1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cornwall it has a little bit of an uncertain situation. You'll see you have the grade level enrollments from today's spotlights, and you'll see that there they have 7 kindergartners that are coming in. So if you go with a strict class size policy, they can have a K1, that fits the policy. So now it's a long time between now and the beginning of the school year. It's possible that they may come up across 10, and so we're hedging our bet a little bit there and putting a 5.5, an extra part of a teacher there in case we're not correct, because we want to make sure that that's okay. We've also added a general ed para there in the event that they do have a 20 student K1. We would want to make sure that they have a support staff member there to assist with that for young kids. Between those two, we will be able to financially manage a budget that goes along with whether or not that's a split K and then 1, or whether they're together in a K and 1. So they're a bit of an anomaly. You see, Ripton has 2 classrooms. So depending upon what you choose to do with your class size policy revision, that would either be a K1, 2, 3 and a 4, 5, or something different, depending upon, again, what your choices are, which you'll begin to talk about later this evening. Those, a point 1 art teacher is a half a day, in case, that's an easier calculation. A point 2 of an AMS teacher is a full day. Let's see. I think the other thing I might draw your attention to here are the last 4 lines on this chart, which show you projected class size averages across, and then staff to student ratios that relate to instructional staff, which is a state formula that we have to use when we determine comparability relative to Title I, and then core staff. Questions about that chart? Yeah. Do you want me to just call on people?
Yeah, I'm so sorry,
It's
Jane.
okay.
It's okay.
I was like so absorbed in it.
Sorry. How? What is the utility of the average class size? Like, is it class? Does that mean the average across the schools?
I think really what that's doing is it's saying, like in Bridport, for example, it's saying, okay, the enrollment of the school is 42. There are 3 home classrooms that are set up, if you will, and so the average there is about 14 students per home classroom.
Okay, I'm reading it wrong. Okay, so it's per school.
Yes, in that
I'm
case
squinting.
it's point
Okay,
school.
right. All
Yep,
right.
yep, it
Never
reads
mind.
vertically.
Never mind. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we go to the next chart? The next chart has Mary Hogan only because it doesn't fit on this chart. So what Matt's put together on this chart is Mary Hogan and then all the smaller schools combined, as well as MOMS and MUHS, so that you can get a sense as to the way those numbers break out. I mean, predictably, you see that, you know, the administrators, you have more of them in the small schools because there are more of them, right? You also have that same dynamic with administrative assistants. To an extent, general ed paras. One of the things that we'll be working with the principals on as we are continuing to work together is to a point Ellie reminded us of in the finance committee meeting earlier today, is just making sure that we know how many adults are in each building, so that we know, you know, just kind of what that looks like at any one time, because you know, the art and music and PE and world language, not all of those folks are there all of the time.
Right.
You know, so that the building principals will be very good at putting an eye on that and just making sure that all that, you know, that makes some sense. So, you know, you see the enrollment between Mary Hogan and all of the smaller schools combined is very comparable. The projected classrooms are 21 and 21. Mary Hogan actually goes down 1 classroom. They don't lose a teacher. That will go up into block 7, you know, but in terms of a classroom, they'll lose 1 because they have a smaller incoming kindergarten class. So the projected class sizes between Mary Hogan and the smaller schools is very comparable, and I know that's been a conversation point in the past, and so we wanted to make sure to run those calculations so that we would understand what it looked like now. Questions about this chart?
Steve. As you pointed out before, Mary Hogan is going to be losing classroom teacher and 4 paras. And the reason those paras were there was because there was a need for them. What is being done to provide comparable services? I mean, the paras, just because we can't hire them doesn't mean we don't need them. And so what's being done to compensate, I guess, for the loss of those permanent positions?
Yeah, so the other strategy that we're trying is really going to be found in block 7, you know, in pulling teachers in that are on team, that are able to deepen content work with students, which actually helps add other adults in the building that, remember, these are para positions that we are not able to hire. So it actually should help to bring more adults in actually to the building with students who also have teaching licenses and have taken training in the various content areas that they're working with related to student data. So Jen is attempting to pilot a bit of that right now, and we'll see if she's able to do that. But that's the strategy that we're working with that helps both make sure that there are enough adults, but also ensures that the adults that are there are helping students work towards specific performance goals.
So if I may follow up, so there are additional people coming in, additional salaried people coming in?
That will be block 7.
Okay, so
It's the equity block.
those will be, okay.
Yep, to be
We've yet to see
revealed. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And also block 5 is student services.
Right.
Which
Correct.
we were wrapping our heads around that today, so that's not built in here, obviously,
Okay.
too. But Wendy, I wonder if you can speak also to the student response position, and that came up in today's finance meeting, just to sort of, I don't know if that exactly covers what you're bringing up, Steve, as far as paras, but just that there's another person who's meant to provide some relief on certain areas that might help compensate for reductions in other places.
Yeah, and I think Mike has shown that that's a model that helps with that. You know, he's been able to be there and to work with students and their families to try to provide different levels of supports and data that is actually helping to make it clearer when extra supports are needed exactly and around, you know, which students. So, you know, that level of intentionality in a system actually helps to cut down the number of staff that you need in order to help to manage particularly student response. But also, I think, you know, they will be folks who are skilled in behavior, who are able to help to support students, you know, so that classrooms can run in smooth and effective ways.
So there would be a person added to the student support in addition to Mike?
So Mike already fills that position in Mary Hogan.
Okay.
So in this case, you know, we would be making that position a permanent position, or permanent as long as we need the model in that respect. We would be adding that into MUMS and MUHS. MUMS right now has Meg Cheresnick beginning to pilot some of those same strategies, and Michaela is finding that to be something that's immensely helpful, and so that continues that work there. And then MUHS is highly interested in the restorative practice and restorative justice pieces, and so them being able to take a look at their student response data very differently is on Caitlin's wish list as well. And so this model, where the same position doing the same work and therefore working together in the Middlebury schools, actually will support the smaller schools who look to them already for leadership around you know, any of our hazing, harassment, and bullying work, because the smaller schools, you know, they may not have some of these things very often, whereas, you know, the schools with more students just see more things like that. So that group, you know, the assistant principals and Mike at Mary Hogan already provide leadership in the district to the other smaller school principals that they appreciate very much. And this will just make that response stronger. And when we are together in January, our presentation will actually will refresh the strategic plan for us and the actual strategies that this speaks to. Any other questions on this slide? So these are, again, works in progress. Our next step with these is we'll bring them to the District Leadership Council on Thursday. The idea is, you know, they will point out things that we don't have on there, that we need to make sure that we add, or that we haven't represented quite right, you know, and so they'll come back continually adjusted as we begin to calibrate. But our calibrations are getting smaller. They're not as many big swings, you know, they're more smaller pieces that we're putting in the right spot.
Okay, so we just wanted to start wrapping up by finishing block 3 with PD and curriculum. This is the other cost center that's where the personnel have been largely allocated to block 3. We're projecting a big jump in personnel budget for PD and curriculum because of two things. First, full salary of Director of Teaching and Learning was moved here, but the second one probably has a larger effect, which is that the salary and benefit expenses of our curriculum coordinators has historically not been a part of this cost center because it's been one of the expense categories that was based in the federal title grants, and so wasn't shown as part of the general fund expenses. And so for the sake of this budgeting exercise, everything is being shown as a general fund expense, and then when we have finished filling up our thermometer for the first time, we get to fill it a second time and say, all right, this is everything that we're gonna spend, how are we gonna earn it all, so that we have it in the bank, when it's time to spend all this money. Obviously, a big piece of that will be our ed spending that we'll ask the taxpayers for. We'll also have, projected, federal grant revenues to look forward to, census block grant revenue, and others. So that's all starting to come together. But especially in the day and age where federal funding can't be taken for granted as it once was, we wanted to make sure that everything started as just an expense without any kind of bucketing in the grant, and then we'll match revenues as we get there.
This is a good example of a conversation that is split that I think will be helpful. The Director of Teaching and Learning and the coordinators, they reflect state mandates for a coordinated curriculum, a local assessment system, needs-based professional development, and so on in the educational quality standards. There will be some funds that probably in the past have been lumped in here that will be separated out into an opportunity that relate to the fee that we pay every year in order to be part of the IB community, which is about $40,000. That is not required. That is our choice about how we go about that. It provides our students with opportunities that we feel are valuable, and so that will go up into the opportunity block because that represents something different from what is mandated, but a way we've chosen to go about this that we believe provides something important for our students. So that's an example of where you'll see something split out in a way that I hope brings a greater level of transparency to everyone regarding what we do that we have to do versus what we do because we've chosen to do it.
Wendy, can I add one thing to that, which is that we also may not use Title II funds to pay for anything that's mandated, which our coordinated curriculum is, and our coordinators are currently partially funded through Title II.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Barbara, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I guess I'm just wondering, what you're saying, Dr. Baker, makes sense about, IB being a choice that the district has made to fulfill the mandate for a coordinated curriculum. But because it fulfills that mandated thing, why wouldn't it remain in Block 3 expenses? Like, what is the
So we
the
could
final rationale?
we could fill the mandate without IB. In fact, every other district in Vermont does that.
Right.
Our belief is that by partnering with IB, we actually can fill that at a level that's really important for our students, and it helps us reach a level of excellence that's important to what we value. And I don't disagree with that, and that's an interesting conversation kind of to have in another day. But that is our choice to do. Just like offering football is a choice that we have, right? We do that because we can. There's no mandate that says we have to. It's something we've chosen to do. And so for the effort of transparency, it's like that $40,000 is really the only part of our curriculum and professional development that is the choice. Everything else is something that we have to do. Increasingly so, for example, our director of literacy, we now have Act 139, right? So now we had a director of literacy, but now much of that is something that is actually mandated that other districts are trying to catch up around.
So then it's just the fees that have been moved.
Right. That's right.
Obviously
Only the
curriculum
fees.
Coordinators.
Oh no, those are
that's
all
still in Block
things.
3. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
all of those things represent things that we have to do. It's only the fees that are different. If we were not using IB, we would still need the people that we have in order to coordinate the curriculum that
that was
we want to the level that we have.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
Okay. Anything else, Dr. Baker?
No.
Okay, that's enough, right?
No. Yeah.
Okay, then moving back to the agenda, report of the chair. I just want to mention one thing. January 6th, I'm not going to be here. I had previously, before we used that date as a board meeting, I made reservations back in probably October to fly to France to see my new grandson, and so I've always tried to work around board meetings, but when they come in that I didn't know about, I won't be there. So I toyed around with doing it remotely and realized, well, it is 12:30 at night there, so it's probably not, or in the morning, I should say, it's probably not a good idea. So Suzanne is going to run the next board meeting, but I will definitely be. Yeah, I'm sad because I really would like to be here when the principals are here. But you'll be in good hands with Suzanne, so thank you. Now, moving on to report of the board, let's go down the list. Communications and engagement.
So we will be meeting tomorrow, and our conversation continues to revolve around how to communicate about the budget to the public.
Okay, facilities.
No update, we meet on Wednesday.
Excellent. Okay, finance.
You've heard it all.
Yep. And negotiations, I have it on here only because.
No, we're dormant.
Okay. Policy committee update, Jamie.
Yep, we have a first read of the D6 policy that we discussed last week. There's very few changes to it, and Pietro made shockingly 0 changes to the thing that we showed him, which was, I felt, almost unbelievable, to be honest. But, so the red stuff is stuff I wrote, the blue stuff is stuff Wendy added. And as you can see, there's, again, it's very similar. I'll just call your attention to, well, for some reason, the warning date changed. Did you change that, Wendy?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Why? Because I think, is this correct that we warn it today?
Yes, in the sense
So
that it's
It's the
cleaner
first
because you
This
can
is the
warn it for the
first
first read today, and then you'll adopt it. If it gets by today, then the next time it's on, it will be on for adoption, which could be as early as January 6th if that's your choice.
Great. Perfect. Other than that, so the what Wendy mentioned earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the slated thing of having 2 classrooms at Ripton, I guess the end result of this whole process is if this policy goes into effect, we'd have most likely 3 classrooms, for example, in Ripton.
Well, if this policy goes into effect, we would start with the idea that you
Right, we
have
started,
3
yeah.
classrooms.
So you're right.
Right, you would have, because you would have one classroom would have 1 kindergartner and 2 first graders. So then we would go ahead out and see if there were other students in ACSD that wanted to come to Ripton into the K1 class. If we were to have enough, then we would have a K1, a 2-3, and a 4-5 that all met the class policy. If we didn't have enough, then I would move the Ks and the 1s together to another location. And if parents wished for something different, they would go ahead and ask for that through a C30 request in terms of attendance as anyone might now. That's the short version.
Right. Sorry. Thank you for explaining it that way. I guess the other things that we talked about in response to questions at the last meeting are in policy contingencies number 2. So we basically clarified, you see there in the, what is that, the second or third sentence, which talks about siblings being able to move with students who volunteer to move to the receiving school, I guess you can call it, that we basically can accept those sibling movement pending the superintendent's determination that everything's kosher with the policy everywhere else. We clarified stuff about transportation, which is the end of section 2, policy contingencies. So we said students who volunteer families will be provided transportation in the new school only under existing bus routes. And then we clarified the part that says that students who move to a receiving school, it is expected that they will stay at that school to the rest of their elementary careers. What am I forgetting, policy people?
I think those are the big ones, right? Transportation, siblings, and the duration.
Yeah.
I think we already talked about the limit of combining 2 classes.
Right.
Oh, right.
So.
Okay.
Suzanne's hand is up.
Oh.
Jamie, can you, sorry, I wasn't here last week, I was sick. Where you say students of volunteer families will provide transportation to the new school only under existing bus routes. What exactly does that mean? Like, I mean, if a parent from Bridport said they wanted to have their kid go to Ripton, there is no bus route from Bridport to Ripton.
There is a bus route from Bridport to Middlebury and Middlebury to Ripton. So, so that would be an existing bus route that they might be able to take advantage of. I think that was, if I'm recalling the policy committee's discussion correctly, that was the bit of the compromise to being able to try to offer transportation if possible, but also understanding that trying to move existing bus routes to pick up, you know, a one student over here or one student over here would probably not be feasible, you know, at that point. So it was a compromise. So students can ride existing bus routes that all come to the Middlebury hub and then go back out in terms of spokes, which also would include bus routes that, or transportation that's happening relative to vans, you know, that are delivering students, you know, throughout the district as well. So
may I ask a follow-up question? I mean, so I know the Bridport buses go out in time to be there for mums and the high school schedule, but would that like allow then a bus route to get them to Ripton in time for school?
It would depend.
I'm just asking because that wasn't very clear to me, that's all.
It would depend. It also depends on where the bus drivers live, you know, which Brian may have some additional input around.
The information that I have is that once you've gotten this all settled as to where you want to take these kids, it's probably going to take the summer to figure it out properly. And you will find in some cases there are shortages of drivers again. So it may be consolidations within the driving. So just think about it, yeah.
Yep.
I think the intention at least was that there would be no guarantee of transportation, the way that there is now where when you attend the school to which you are assigned.
But an attempt.
But an attempt, yeah, like trying to make it work, but no, not being able to ensure that it'll happen.
Any other questions? Jason?
A couple questions. Optimal class size is set at 17. Was that new from last week?
It is new
It
from
is.
last week, yes. It's meant to be set as, you know, kind of an average of 17 across the district. Only because it says you have to have an optimal one, so, you know, it's added one in there. You could choose to have it be anything you want, but.
Yeah, I saw that. I assume you chose 17 because I don't know, why did you choose 17?
It's an average across the district, so
Okay.
it's a little, they'll be a little heavier on the secondary side and
Yeah.
probably a little bit smaller on the elementary side, so it's shooting for an average optimal of 17.
I have a couple more questions.
Go ahead.
It's okay if I can. So the other thing that worries me a little bit about this policy is the equity piece of it, and the fact that, you know, we just spent a long time hashing out a strategic plan and got feedback from a wide swath of our community that asked us to build equity into all of our decision making, and including budgeting, and which is we're starting that process of equity-based budgeting, and I'm just like, if you put this policy through an equity filter, does this increase equity in our district or decrease equity in our district? Because when I look at it, I think it directly decreases equity in our district. And I know it's short term in the fact that, you know, we're going to come up with some more long-term policy adjustments, but if a kindergartner goes to gets assigned to school next year, that's 6 years they're gonna be at that school. So that is not particularly short term. That is, we're gonna be living with that inequity that we build into this policy for at least 6 years. Right.
Can you say more about that, that inequity that you're talking about? I think I know what you mean, but I just wanna make sure I'm understanding what you mean. Like, what's the inequity that you mean when you say that the kindergartner will be there for 6 years?
I mean that the families that can participate in this opportunity to send their kindergartner or first grader to another school cannot be a family that requires transportation, cannot be a family that requires after-school care, can not be a family that, isn't good at planning, or maybe isn't good at navigating school board policies, maybe has a language barrier, like all the things that we are trying to address with, an equity lens on decision making. This does not do it. But
That's true.
I don't know what equity filters exist, and I think that it is really interesting and important for us to think about how we develop some way of evaluating policy making to assess for that. I think there are two sides to thinking about this, and I don't know, Jason, if this is also what you meant when you said like a kid in kindergarten who's going to be moved to a new school is going to be there for 6. I don't know if that's also in your calculus, is like that doesn't feel like it meets the equity bar, but there are definitely scenarios here. I mean, the thing that I think does actually speak to equity is providing parental agency in a way that we have not. And I think that there are a lot of ways that it feels like that agency will be stacked for some people more than others. But we've never really provided the opportunity for people to, even on a limited basis, have even this much option to say if they want their student for any reason to attend another school. So I don't know, I guess my bigger question is how do we, I don't think any of us are experts in equity, and it would be interesting and probably important for us to figure out like how we bring in more of that perspective. We weren't really part of those discussions in the building of the strategic plan. It came to us having gone through rigorous process of that work, and so none of us have necessarily, at least in the board context, received that kind of training or perspective. And I do worry a little bit about the use of equity, as any one of us can kind of pull it out and apply it any way we want to. And I would love more expert guidance in how we do that, because I think it's going to be really important conversation, but I worry doing that a little bit on the fly and, through policy making or policy adoption and in these discussions. So I think more guidance on that would be really important for us to have as a board.
Mary Heather.
And then I had my
And then
hand as
Ellie
well.
too. Okay.
Oh, did you have your hand up first? Did you?
Yeah.
Why don't you
Okay, go
ahead?
Ellie.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
I was, I want to comment on what has been brought up about the 17 as the optimal class size, and I worry a little bit about that number being in here because I hear you saying that, that means the average class size for the whole district, but I can also see that number coming up in the future where they say when we have classes that are size 10 or 11, and we say, well, you as the board have adopted that you want your optimal class size to be 17, so we want to further consolidate or make these classes larger. And if we're saying the maximum for kindergarten is 19, it would not make sense that we would think optimal is just a couple students away from the absolute max a teacher should have. So it doesn't make sense to me to put 17 as that number across the board. Unless we put some language in there that says that that should be the average, and we should consider that the high school would be higher and that we would want the elementary school averages to be lower.
Mary Heather.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the policy committee's work to incorporate some changes, particularly to clarify around like what happens with siblings and what do we mean about transportation provision and the duration that kids would be expected to stay at a new school if they are moved. But I share Jason's concern about this, what I see as an inequitable opportunity when you look at it in terms of the real opportunity that's available to all ACSD families. And I think for me, my discomfort is really centered around codifying it in policy. I think, we've said this, like, this is a temporary solution to address an immediate problem. And I appreciate and recognize that, and I appreciate and recognize all the work that the committee members have put into finding solutions for that. But I can't, my concerns about the same things that Jason brought up about, who's this really available to? Is it available to kids in our smaller schools, for whom their departure might create a D6 problem for their assigned school? And, this effort at compromising transportation, I just don't think is really realistic when you're, if somebody from Bridport, for example, wanted to go to Ripton, the timing of the bus schedules, it's just not realistic, and it doesn't feel like a real gesture of providing transportation. And for those reasons, I agree, they're just not equitable, and I have a real discomfort knowingly codifying that into policy, because if we're going to do that and use this as a short-term solution, and then use that as like, well, did it work, and how do we feel about school choice on a broader scale? I just don't think employing something that has glaring inequities is a good start. Now, that's not to say Ripton's request and the effort of trying to find folks to fill a classroom that's missing some kids isn't a reasonable request. I feel like if it is in fact a temporary solution, then perhaps we need to treat it as a temporary action, or an action that we take just as a standalone action on this specific request, and not codify it into policy, whereby the suggested contingencies could be simplified, where we just enable the superintendent to we could have language in there that says, if the class size minimum is not met, the superintendent may propose a plan and an equitable process for board approval to invite students, blah, 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 and or may move students. So the tool is still there, but the specifics that, in my opinion, are not addressing some of the inequities that Jason brought up, are not codified in policy. I think that's the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable, is putting this into policy knowing that it's not meeting the mark, with the expectation that we'll go back and change that. Why not do it right now? And I think we can equip the superintendent with the tools to address and create appropriately sized classrooms, and not make this mistake. I think we can still honor the work that the policy committee has done, but perhaps those details can be something that a superintendent puts together if and when appropriate. But I have a problem with having all this sort of process outline that doesn't account for the equity things that they're pretty obvious. And if we're gonna ignore them, it just doesn't align with our strategic plan.
Okay, Suzanne was next, I think, and then Ellen.
Okay, I just have a follow-up question on Mary Heather's, just like a clarification question.
Okay, so, but you'll get your chance.
No, let
Let her, okay.
let Ellen know.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask, do you think, Mary Heather, then that it's more about like sort of setting a broader policy that doesn't lay out these kinds of specific actions and then, but maybe sets up the superintendent through procedure that requires board approval to, like, when a situation like this gets triggered, that then the superintendent is, asked, the board asks of the superintendent, like, with staff, develop a procedure that comes before the board for approval to remedy the D6 challenge. And so in this, like, this year, Wendy could come with this idea as just procedure, not policy, but like on a short, I'm just trying to understand like how to
Yeah, I
cut
guess
the way that you're describing it.
if it's okay for me to respond,
Yes.
I don't wanna, okay. I guess my thinking is that instead of contingency 2 and 3, all that language with the whole process, that it would be simplified to just say, you know, if the minimum's not met, yes, I wrote this down actually. If a class size is projected to have a size below the minimum D6 requirements and the superintendent determines the integrity of the educational environment is jeopardized, the superintendent may, 1, present for board approval a plan, an equitable process to invite families across ACSD to enroll into the underfilled classroom, and or 2, assign a cohort of students to another school, and that language is the same that's already in there. So I guess it provides the tool, and the burden is then placed on the superintendent to determine, okay, do I want to bring this to the board? It's not like an automatic thing. It could be at the discretion of the superintendent to decide, am I going to do this if it's a classroom of 1 student? Am I going to do this if it's a classroom that's just missing a few students? And it would allow the superintendent to have a mechanism to present that solution, but not require it. And also, yes, it would be for board approval so that the board could contemplate, have these equity concerns been addressed in this circumstance? I guess, to me, it seems like the tool is still there, but we're not codifying something that inherently is missing some stuff. And I feel like if we're opening up D6, we should do it correctly. And yeah, I think it would give the opportunity for the superintendent to perhaps create a procedure. But I guess I just, I feel like I want to honor the work in developing the tool, but I also, I have a lot of discomfort with having, you know, a partially baked tool codified in the policy.
Okay, that's really helpful, thanks.
Yeah.
Suzanne?
So I guess, you know, when I asked the question about the transportation, I was really hoping that that wasn't gonna be the answer. Because when the towns voted to all come together, we purposely put the school choice on the back burner for numerous reasons, knowing that, you know, some parents can't transport their students even if they wanted them to go to a different school. You know, it could decimate an entire school if parents all worked in Middlebury and said they wanted all their kids to go to Middlebury. It could close the school. You know, there was so many pieces to it, and equity and transportation and what parents can afford to move kids and what parents can't afford to move their kids, that we chose not to have this conversation. And it sounds like we're right back there again, but by saying, well, you know, if the transportation's available, you know, you can do it. But that means then that if a parent doesn't have a car or shares a car with a spouse, and the car's not going in the same way that the child needs to go, then their child can't go to that school. So we're missing the whole equity piece that we've been talking about for all of our students. I know it's an issue, and we need to fix something for next year. But I struggle with putting something in a policy where it's the cans versus the can'ts. You know, the cans that have the financial resources, the means, whatever, to move their child if they so choose, versus those that might want to move their child for a fresh start. You know, maybe they've been bullied or something and they just want their child to have a fresh start, but they can't because they can't get their kid to somewhere else. So it's not, to me, it's not equity. It's not doing what's right for all students in this district. And it's a great start, don't get me wrong, guys. I mean, it's a wonderful start. I feel we need to look at it more with an equity lens on it.
Steve?
Thank you for all the kudos that the policy committee has received about coming to this, but you do realize this was a compromise and that it was a lot of hard work in the policy committee. We don't all agree with all parts of this policy. And some of the objections that Jason and Mary Heather have raised have been part of that conversation. So having it in there was a compromise, and a number of other things were compromises as well. And so, you come out of a intense conversation like that, and you say, so nobody really likes this, but we are going to present it to the board because it does have a little something for everyone. And you're right. I raise those objections about choice. Are we introducing choice? And it's not. This is a bad implementation of choice. But if it's one step in the process, can I derail the entire process by saying I don't like this one thing? Because it does a lot of other things. And it does give the superintendent powers that she didn't have before to fix some of the problems that are happening. It also codifies the idea that we're not going to be combining 5 different classes into one room schoolhouse, which was not in here before. So I think everybody has to personally weigh, is this the compromise that you could make? And I don't know that. I think everybody has their own set of values and ideas that they're bringing to the table. And we did, and I don't think this is mischaracterizing the policy meeting. I mean, we went through a lot of work to come up with this. So it's not like we all sat around and said, oh, hey, this is a great idea. Let's do all this. So there was division on the policy committee, as there is division on the board. And so this is a first read. You're not voting for anything tonight. And I would ask you to consider the objections that you've raised and think about what that whole, the good of the whole versus the particular pieces that you don't like. This is a policy. We can change it again if we don't like it. If something goes wrong, we can change that. This is not set in stone. This is not something the voters approve or disapprove. This is a policy that we change as a board and can do at will. If it turns out that this doesn't work, or you don't like what's happening, then we can come back in and look at it. But I would ask you to ask this other question: are we prepared to not do anything on D6 for the coming year because we're uncomfortable with some pieces of it?
I'm gonna let Laura go first and then Alan.
I want to make sure that we are all on the same page here, in that this is in response to a class not meeting minimum size requirement, and that it does not open up school choice for the whole district. First point. Second point being that this does not change the school choice or the school hardship request at all. There's no touching of that here. So we still have that in C30, right? So that still exists, and those exemptions do require transportation, correct, Dr. Baker?
For C30?
No, if a C30 request is granted, then transportation is provided by the family.
Okay. So the equity regarding transportation is something that I brought up in policy meetings and we talked about pretty extensively. And I think the intent of this is that we would want to provide every single possible opportunity to provide transportation for students so that we mitigate the inherent equity issues in here. And I also, we spent hours and hours and hours talking about this and going back and forth and trying to figure out the best way to compromise so that we could move forward with what is probably an imperfect policy in an attempt to provide our district leadership with the tools needed to move forward here and not get bogged down consistently with this same issue over and over again. So, be that what it may, this is where we as a policy committee, after many meetings that have run twice as long as was planned, happened. And I think that equity was something very central in our mind, but I think it's going to be a really hard way to be 100% equitable in a policy like this.
So, I know, Ellen, you had your hand up.
Jamie hasn't spoken.
Okay, Jamie.
This is all useful feedback, and I second everything my committee mates have said about the process to come up with this. And I mean, just thinking of editing here, I feel like partially what the process is that this will happen is we will that a D6 contingency will trigger a process by which we may go about looking to invite other folks to join this other classroom, and we see who we get and what it's already written here that, well, if you likely will not be able to do it if leaving your current school will create a D6 problem there, right? So that's a limitation right there, and it limits people. And is that inequitable? I don't know, but it seems totally sensible to me and totally reasonable to make that restriction. Let's say we get 10 volunteers. I'm just making this up, and all of them, or 9 of them, are easy to provide transportation under existing bus routes. Great. And one of them is not. And that person is an otherwise, eligible candidate to do this. Like, I can imagine, for example, in the sentence that we read about volunteer, students of volunteer families will be provided transportation, blah, blah, blah. Could it say, students of volunteer families might only be provided transportation? In other words, is there some I'm speaking to people who know about transportation, the logistics of it in the room. Like, is there a way in which you look at a person's residence, look at bus routes and say, okay, we can do that or accommodate that in some capacity? So you introduce the word might instead of will, and you have than a process which seems a little bit more, I don't know, what's the right word, flexible, to accommodate what will almost undoubtedly be a very small number of people, yet who may be satisfying a really important role for our district as a whole. And to me, that is worthy and is just, in some ways just worthy of making an exception, and also perhaps worthy of making this edit I'm suggesting.
I'm gonna let Brian go.
Sure.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think to answer Jamie's question, I think Matt and Dee are working together. I don't know where Matt went.
Matt had to go home.
He had to go
Okay.
home.
So anyway, I've had some conversations about this situation, and I think that if
About D6?
about the question that you wanted an answer
Oh,
to.
great.
If you state that, and then Matt and Dee get together with it, they could probably give you an answer.
Okay.
It may not be in 24 hours.
Right.
It's gonna take a lot of logistics, but if you want to get your answer, then you go to the source. And those are those people.
Okay.
Okay. Ella?
Just to pull back for a second, the other pieces of this that the policy committee spent a lot of time on were bigger questions around school choice. And there's more to come from us on recommending or talking with the board around kind of how we engage with bigger questions, including around school choice. I would really caution us against assuming and predetermining that school choice is inequitable. It's not. It can be incredibly equitable. It can be something that lifts all boats, and there are plenty of districts that have found models of incorporating degrees of school choice into their decision making and into the agency and the autonomy that is provided to parents and families that is very equitable. So I just a higher level comment about casting the entirety of the notion of school choice. Obviously, the devil's in the details on how you execute that to make it so, but I don't think school choice is inherently an inequitable option. I also think it's interesting that in C30, we do allow parents under hardship to petition for another option for their kids outside of their school, their town school, and in those cases, those parents will have to provide transportation. So we have codified in policy these very specific exceptions, partly I assume because there's so few of them. Mm-hmm. We're talking about very isolated and specific cases. I don't think that these ideas in D6 are different. We're talking about handfuls of kids in very specific situations. Like Laura said, it's not triggering an entire district open conversation. And so I think if to some degree we've already acknowledged nuance and situations where we may not meet perfect equity standards, but we are achieving other goals. And I also think that any situation in which we don't provide some option, some process by which you're faced with a choice of relocating a cohort of kids out of their town school forever for the remainder of their elementary school, if we do not provide another part of that process that at least attempts to find a solution that does not require that, that's also inequitable. It is saying that these children being relocated and these families losing that connection to their school and that community is fine, and that is something that we're going to do without engaging with an alternative process. So I'm interested in finding the way that we do that, be it through policy, through plans, through procedure, what have you. But I think it's really important that we take seriously the option that's in this proposed policy of relocating families outside of their towns, and that part of taking that seriously is engaging with alternatives to that to make sure that that is the only solution to these very specific challenges when they arise.
one thing I've been thinking about is I'm listening to everyone, right? I think we have to keep it in perspective because, you know, parents that I know aren't going to arbitrarily necessarily want their kids to move, because if they're across this district, they want to be able to, if something happens, a child is sick, they want to be able to drive there in a reasonable amount of time.
Sure.
Right? So I think just the nature of that kind of limits, you know, the ones that would really want to opt to do something like that, so that it's geographically, you know, close to that particular school. And I'm not going to say Ripton, because it could be Shoreham next year, or 2 years later, it could be Salisbury, it could be anywhere. It could even be Cornwall, because all of a sudden, you know, we have a decline for a particular year, right? And this would then potentially help, right? And realistically, to me, like if it was, say, Cornwall, it would probably be parents that kids, you know, like I live on the Cornwall line, right? So it's literally closer for me to drive to Cornwall than it is to Shoreham, right? And it wouldn't be hard to solve those kinds of issues. So, you know, I think that's would be, you know, some of the consideration that would go into a decision a parent would make. As opposed to, you know, truthfully, you know, like if I live in Shoreham, and even if, you know, I wanted, you know, even if Ripton was attractive to me, I wouldn't want them that far away, right? Because it's just really would be hard if I needed to run there, pick up my child because they're sick or something was happening. So this isn't school choice in that particular area. It's really identifying, you know, there's an opportunity here for, you know, potentially parents and families to take advantage of that or not, right? They may not. But I think it would more probably be adjoining towns, you know, that would most likely want to participate in it at this level, right, of this limited choice. Whereas, you know, the bigger discussion, obviously, that's totally different. And that's just what's been kind of rolling around my head as I'm listening to all this. You know, I don't think we can make this the bigger thing right now. I think we need to really kind of focus. This is, you know, just kind of a niche thing that could impact any one of our schools and be in a position where we have a particular year where the enrollment is low. And by taking those kids out, it really then sets in motion, you know, it could be then the following year, you know, you have enough, right? And now you have a gap in a grade, which I think has some downsides as well, you know, from my view, right? And so I'm looking at it from that practical perspective as well. So, you know, I personally would like to, you know, I really commend the policy committee for all the work that they've done on here, and I know it's really, and you know, I've listened to many of the meetings, it's hard work, it's really hard work. And I, you know, personally for one, and I don't speak for obviously the board or anything, I'm just giving my personal thought, is, you know, I would be willing to give it a try. Chip?
I haven't said anything, only because I've listened to everybody's very well thought out arguments in a lot of different ways. And I have to say that the amount of time that you've argued this point, I mean, the committee, to try to come up with, as Steve said, a compromise, makes sense to me, and I agree with you in what you said, basically your last sentence there about that, and that's where I would fall. I think there is some real equity issues, but I think there's always going to be in every situation we deal with. We're never going to solve them all, and we're not going to solve this one. All we're going to do is put in enough flexibility that the superintendent's got ability to deal with it if in fact it doesn't work out the other way. And I don't know what else you can do. Other than have a teacher with every one child.
Steve?
Just as a procedural reminder, the policy committee brings policy before the board. The board may change that policy in front of the board. If you don't like a particular clause in this policy, you can ask to amend it, and if that amendment passes, then that would change the policy. So, you know, you've got to decide where you stand on this. Because if you propose the amendment and not enough people agree with changing it, then it would stand. If enough people agree with changing it, it would change. And then you know, the board adopts policy, not the policy committee.
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
Right. We've kind of put our best effort out there.
Yeah.
It's up to the rest of the people to decide what to do now. You got two.
Okay,
Somebody else.
yep.
Was it you?
Okay,
There's like three, Jason, Mary Heather, and then I think Laura.
No, I was pointing.
Oh, you're pointing. Thank you.
So also this policy applies to Cornwall's kindergarten class because they are below minimum, and combining K1 and Cornwall would be above the maximum of 19 for next year at 21. So this would apply to two schools next year, assuming that that kindergarten class of 7 stays at that number and doesn't tick up, right?
So it actually is, it's an important clarification, Jason, if I might. So one of the things that this policy changes from the way that the previous policy and procedure read together is around, I'm just trying to find, I think it is, I think it's number 1 under contingencies. So if a class exceeds or is projected to exceed the upper limit of D6 requirements, and the superintendent determines the integrity of the educational program is jeopardized, then the superintendent has the authority to divide that class into sections that meet policy guidelines. So if I decided that the 20th student jeopardized the program, then I could divide. If I decided the 20th student didn't, then we could have 20 students and that would be okay. Similar to the other end, which is in number 2, if I decided that 9 students doesn't jeopardize the educational program, you know, then we can go with 9, even though it doesn't quite meet 10, right? But if at one point, and I think this was part of the conversation we had this fall, I and those who advised me said, okay, now what we've got here actually jeopardizes the educational program. That's the place at which this would kick in. So the only place in the district right now, foreseeably for 25-26 that this applies, would be the younger grades in Ripton. Right now.
Like,
Thank you
isn't
for
this?
clarifying. I have a couple other questions. So one thing, we're talking about suggestions, like concrete suggestions to change the policy that would make it potentially more palatable. So one of the things that I would like to see is that contingency number 2 becomes a trigger that the superintendent may use. Right now it says the superintendent will use. So I would like to give that as an option, and if the school choice trigger is met, I would like to see a step where the process is approved by the board to ensure that some attempt at equity can be demonstrated.
So in practicality, the superintendent will always take this option. So it would mean that, you would always want to do as much as you could, at least while this superintendent is serving. So that would mean that the process is one that I would devise and I would bring by the board, and then the board at that time, depending upon who it is, would determine if it was going to allow it, which can make it a political process and not equitably implemented at all, given the way that a board could swap. That's just a food for thought, you know, around that. So, you know, I would have, I'd have worries about that advancing the points that you've said are important as a board.
Well, I would love for someone to make an argument about that this policy improves equity and isn't gonna only be used by families of privilege, because that's
No, we have
all I
no
see at
idea.
this point, so.
We have no idea.
We have no
who's
idea.
gonna decide that they wanna do this.
Right.
There's a presumption in all of this that is,
I think I'm sorry.
Well, I guess just to Jason's point, you know, does this improve equity? You know, is your question. And so if you follow it through right now, what is the baseline that we're working off of? Right now we're looking at a school where we don't know how the younger grades are going to run at all. Right? And I think the problem is that right now there's nothing. Right? So I agree that this is not the degree of equity that we want, that we're aspiring to. And my concern is doing nothing because it's not good enough. You know that I think it's worse to do nothing than to do something that's less than optimal. Right? So I don't know that I can say this improves equity because I don't know what the baseline is right now. I don't know that there is any equity in our current non-policy. So that's where I'm at.
You know, just quickly, I don't see equity as the same for everybody. And it may be, for some people, it's allowing them to move for some reason, some educational reason, not just to move. For other people who can't move, maybe there's an opportunity as to where they are by providing something. That's different. It's not the same, but you are providing what you're calling equity. It doesn't have to be the transportation. It could be something at the school that they're located at that would take care of it. But you have to decide what you're after.
I wonder if you added something to contingency number 3 that says something along the lines of the superintendent will ensure that any movement of students across schools will take into account class size, school capacity, and equity of opportunity into, so on and so forth. So that would allow, for example, it would allow me to make other provisions for somebody who really wanted to go, maybe what was in there already in terms of the bus routes or other possibilities was problematic, but it would allow me to make some take some steps to allow a family to take advantage of an opportunity when it otherwise might not be easy, so it perhaps some language like that, which is inelegantly stated so far, might help, just to say that it gives that extra flexibility for the superintendent to ensure, that equity of opportunity is provided to the extent possible. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
And really keeping track of, should we deploy, adopt it, really keeping track of, who wanted to come and who couldn't, right? We're assuming right now that there's gonna be people that are far away and wouldn't be able to get there using the bus, but maybe reality will show us that in these limited situations, that's not necessarily gonna be the case.
Well, the implementation of this policy would be challenging if 25 students decided that they wanted to come into a K-1 classroom that already has 3 students in it, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
So the procedure that I develop has to include how to manage all of that, and it has to have some parameters under which, we can operate that way.
Okay, Jason?
One more question about the, I forget what the language is here, about it's implied that they will stay in the new school, but it's not explicitly required, and it doesn't explicitly say that they are assigned to that new school and then would have to petition to get reassigned potentially to their previous school or the school in their town of residence, so.
Yeah, it does.
It is anticipated.
It's anticipated,
Right,
but they'll stay in the school.
Oh.
And
But-
I think what that means, I mean, I wrote that word. I think it means that we assume that once you move, you're just like everybody else there. Like you're just like it's anticipated that most kids at Cornwall will now finish at Cornwall, though not everyone will, likely. The same thing. If there's a better word for it. But I think the intention there was to say that, you know, I assume superintendent would say, okay, well, we're making this choice. We assume we're working on the assumption that your child will likely graduate from that school or whatever the right word is.
It's meant to be an assurance to the family that as long as the school is open, you're able to attend. And by saying it this way, it doesn't come into conflict with C30 because C30 stipulates that a parent has a right to their town's place, right? So we can't say you give up that right if you take on this new assignment. So this basically assures the family that if you go there, that the intention is that you can stay if you want to.
That's different though. Okay, so I think I misunderstood. I thought that once you opted in, like you were in, and that's your assigned school going forward, and you can't just say like, didn't work out, I want to go somewhere else.
You can opt out.
But is that a C30 request? Like you have to go through the official C30 process to do that? No, you can just
No.
say, okay.
Because C30 policy would that is your town of residence. So in this
unless
case,
that changes.
yeah.
So you don't. So a family doesn't have to commit for the full.
No, they don't. This is an assurance on our part. You know, that basically says that because I think to a point that Chip may have brought up, you know, in our last meeting, the parent would have a lot of questions about, well, what does this mean? Does this mean I get to go the following year, or is this just a 1-year thing, or? So this basically says as long as the school's open, you can stay.
And it's unlikely that suddenly 5 students will appear in that school of that particular grade level. If there's a deficit there, there's a deficit there. And it's unlikely that that community school will be able to field 10 students because that's why it got moved in the first place. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Suzanne.
So the only other piece that needs to be watched over in this scenario would be running into an issue where you have a class that then becomes a non-least restrictive environment, meaning that you end up with more IEP students than you do regular ed students.
Correct.
And I mean, it can't be 50-50, it can't be equal, it has to be 49 or 50 at the least.
That's number 3, Suzanne. Check that language. That's meant to.
Okay.
It's meant to address those points.
Okay.
Okay, so one last comment, I think, and then we'll
One
move
last thing,
forward.
and I just want to apologize in advance because I don't even know if this board has the appetite for it, but I brought it up last time, and I'm just going to bring it up again because I want to say it out loud. But I do think it could be considered to change the minimum number of students in a classroom from 10 to 12. The reasons, again, it's reportable. I know it doesn't apply to
It's still
mixed
not
grade classrooms, but
it's
it would
not-
be reportable
It's not.
for single grade classrooms, would it not?
Yes.
For single grade, it would be.
Single grade you would report.
So I think that is a good reason, because it would enable us to report data for our single grade classrooms. I think that it sort of sets the foundation for movement toward that direction in our long-term planning. Based on the tables that Dr. Baker provided in the weekly update and that were shared in the presentation today, it wouldn't necessarily change the configurations for the next year, I don't believe.
Yeah, it would change. I think it would change a lot of configurations.
Some. We have some that are 10, 11, that are single grades right now.
Right.
The older grades.
But again, if we have that doesn't meet the minimum, but also would need to be determined by the superintendent to compromise. I mean, I think there's flexibility for the superintendent to work within that, but I think, again, while we're in D6, it's an opportunity to address it. And finally, if we did address it now, we wouldn't have to address it later, and the policy committee could really just focus on C30. So again, I don't know if there's appetite for it, but I just want to say it out loud.
So Ellie.
I just like to, it's my understanding that the 10 student classroom is based off of some evidence-based decision around what's best for kids and their social and emotional learning. And I think we should make sure that we make decisions based on that and not based on what makes our lives easier.
And Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, I think this opening up, I don't think we really talked about this too much at the committee level, for reasons I think mostly that Ellie just said. I also think that opening up the question of this would, I don't know, I feel like it would require us to ask or to go to people who are experts in this question, whether or not what is the absolute best range. And I know for a fact there are people who will say, well, of course, you should lower the minimum number. And that's the best, that's one of the things you can do. You've chosen 10, which is arbitrary, and 7 is better. And so we could open that can of worms, but we're going to get we're going to get evidence of all kinds of different things. And as far as appetite goes, I don't know. I just wonder if we have the appetite to do all that, because that is what opening that up will get that stuff too, which I'm not opposed to doing if people think it's a great idea, but it feels like I've always felt that we should, especially in this recent era, I think, of our school board, we should do things that reflect student need most of all. Rather, I mean, there are ways, I know I've said this before a million times, but there are ways to get data and to use data and to work with data of small numbers of people. We may have to do it, it may have to take a little bit of time and energy, but we can totally do it. And that's what researchers do. And I don't think that's a good enough reason to change that number from just on the fly at the board level.
Also this year in, was it June? When did we have our retreat? We did an executive session.
November.
It was, when did, I can't remember.
November.
It was just November.
Beginning of November.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Last month.
It was last month. We did an so we have found a way to see the data, right? If we go into executive session. And I think that just the ebb and flow of our smaller rural schools, more often than not, we're going to have combined classrooms. Some years we'll have them, some years we won't. And so we won't be able to, consistently see the data. You might be able to see it for 1 year, but not necessarily for a history of a couple years, which is really what you need to see, unless we do what we did in November, right? That's just my thoughts.
Can I just ask a process question? Mm-hmm. What happens now? Like, just remind me. So the policy committee meeting is quickly. Are we meeting before November, January 6th? No. Seems like we met all the time. Then all of a sudden we have this big break. And so we had originally planned, I think, correct, just to be totally public about it, we planned that everyone would like this. That was our assumption, frankly. That we'd be like, this is great. We can't believe we did this. And that we would bring the policy for a second read on January 6th. Auspicious day. And so what is the vibe now? Like, what should we plan on that? How do we what?
And I think the process is, this is the point of the first reading, is that everybody sees what we've created in the policy. When you do a second reading for a vote, the board it's at the board's pleasure. They can table it. They can say this needs more work. They can send
Right.
it back to the committee. They can vote on it. They can vote to amend it. So, kind of process-wise, we've done what we needed to do, and I didn't think everybody would like us, by the way.
Okay, well, I mean, you did say we solved this problem.
Well, I think we
a number
did.
of times.
Yes.
So,
I didn't
I'm
say
just
we would
saying.
be liked.
Yeah.
I didn't say we would be liked. I'm kind of saving my ammunition for
Yeah.
C30, but
Okay.
but I
Good to know.
I think as far as your process question goes, that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, we could take. I mean, there's been some. You made the suggestion about number 3.
I did.
You know,
sort of, yes.
which I think incorporates some of the concern that people are raising, and adds a level of, what's the right word, like oversight or care about a specific equity lens that is reasonable and totally doesn't change the overall. Doesn't disrupt. I think it's actually better, frankly, than it is right now. And so in some ways, I guess I would propose that to everyone that we do make that change to that second part, to add in that sort of clause or concern about equity permitting, so to speak, and then
Then you bring it back for another.
then bring it back
first read.
for a what?
For another read by the board because you made a change to it, and then after that, if the board likes that change, then you can then bring it back to finalize it.
Oh, let's not do that. Let's bring it forward and make an amendment.
Right, we can do an amendment.
We can amend it right now, right?
Well, no, it's
No,
not
'cause
under
it's not for
motion.
vote.
It's not under
Sorry.
a motion.
We
could do that on January
But
6th.
that could happen in January 6th.
Yes.
You can, once there's a motion to approve
I
the
see.
policy, someone can then make a motion to amend that policy, to put that, additional sentence in there.
Okay.
But if
Does
it's a
that?
final read, then it would
yeah.
have to be.
Then it has to be read again.
Read again,
Yeah, you have to read the policy you're going to vote on.
in its final shape.
That's right, you have to warn it in its final shape, so, yes, that's what
okay.
we're trying to say. What time is it? That's what we're
9:30
trying to say, so,
sometime in,
We're meeting 3 weeks in a row in January. We could bring it January 6th, amend it, get it into final shape, and do the final warning on the 13th.
But we need
There's
10
10
10
days.
days.
10 days.
so I think what we could do
The 20th.
is, we could work on some language that added an equitable lens to the third contingency. We could bring that back for first read again on January 6th, if that passed muster. And we could also revise, the the optimum class size, since we're doing that, to 15, if you like, instead of 17. So then we can, you can have first read January 6th, and then you could have second read January 17th, which is your last board meeting in January, or the first board meeting in February, which should be fine. If you like.
So why can't we motion to amend it now?
Because it's not
It's
up
not
for
under,
action.
it's not a motion.
Okay.
It's not currently a motion.
And it's 9:30 at night.
And it's 9:30. Okay, Jason?
So one suggestion on contingency number 3, can we just take the specificity of D6 out of that and just say that you're gonna, look at all policies, right? Shouldn't we make sure that any change doesn't violate any other policy, not just focus in on D6, right?
I think they put this here to specifically make sure that it didn't make too few students in another classroom. So this was related specifically to class size. I think probably the best thing to do might be number 3, if you want to add that on the other page, where it says comply with state, federal, or policy requirements. You could do something of that nature there, if you wanted to add that. You do have an equity policy, and I'm sure some of you think that no matter what happens, we're gonna be violating the equity policy, right? So, I mean, that's a bit of a snare, depending upon how people are perceiving that, that's one of the policies that you have, so, I'm trying to balance pragmatism with trying to help you
get where you're all trying to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're in a position to move on the agenda. It's correct?
Mhm.
So the policy committee will take this back and
We
do
got it.
some, yeah, okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Next,
you.
Addison Central CPAC update.
There hasn't been a meeting since we last had the meeting with Dr. Baker. The standing time is this Thursday, but I haven't heard anything. But
I
there,
haven't seen anything.
Okay, great. Suzanne, VSBA, anything?
VSBA, we met, last week and we saw the preliminary report from the Commission on the Future of Public Education. There is some concerns that there are some recommendations within that report that if the report gets sent to the legislature with the recommendations in it, that they might say, oh, these are things we need to do, instead of that word recommendation. So those may or may not be in there. We also saw the 16 VSA Chapter 25 Attendance and Discipline statute, and there's more lines through it than there really are words left, but it's 4 pages of policy on attendance. And so that is being updated and changed. The other thing that we heard is that this year the legislative body is probably really going to be looking at class size, budgets, and number of buildings. So they're going to be really thinking about making some changes. So that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. The Career Center.
The board meets on Thursday, so the Career Center board has not met since the last time we met. Nothing to update yet.
Okay. Middlebury Community TV update. Kurt asked me to just mention that they recorded the 10th grade personal, I can't read my
Exhibition.
own, right? Yeah, exposition, the projects. And also, there was a, they filmed the 3-school collaboration as well. And then the third item is, he really does want to get on the finance committee agenda. So I sent an email to both Chip and Matt, and I also included his email on there as well. So he does need to talk about, some financial implications for next year. So if he could, if somebody could just reach out to him, that would be awesome. And then next we have the Parks and Recreation.
I have no update.
Okay.
Could I ask?
Yes, please.
You mentioned the 3-school participation, which because I'm president of the opera company, and the opera company was a sponsor of this. This was a tremendous event, honestly.
Okay, thank
and,
you.
I would say that if you have a chance, and it is recorded, to have a look at it. There were 140 students from the 3 schools participating in this opera. Okay, and it was pretty amazing, and
Cool.
So it's worth looking at, not from the opera component, but for the fact that 3, well, yes, for that too, but for the fact that we can do this, someone had a vision, and it was carried out in a grand and very, very successful manner. So.
Excellent. And at the MCTV, it's it's probably on the website at this point in time.
Yeah,
That
I
you can
guess, I don't know.
definitely take a look at it. This brings us to the second public comment period on our agenda. And so we have folks out in, we have one individual in the room. If in fact you would like to make a public comment, either on Zoom or in the room, please raise your hand. Again, it's limited to 3 minutes. Please state your name and your town of residence.
Is there anyone else?
Not so far, so go for it.
All right, I'm Maurice Bissonette. I spoke last meeting, and I didn't feel like it was appropriate, but when I was here, I was actually looking at the board at the budget and stuff. I was like, oh, That's my job on there, actually, in my program. Oh no. So I just wanted to speak about ACP. I saw in the budget that it was looking like that's a possible cut. I work at ACP, which is a program for really what it's ended up being is a program for underprivileged kids, kids with neurodiversity, and kids with trauma. We've got about 5 kids right now. It kind of cycles through from like 6 to 7. Some kids come in and go out. And I'm actually not here to I'm looking at all the schools and our need for money. So I'm not like advocating like, don't shut this program down or anything like that. What I am advocating for is over years and years, like last year, the Walden Project got cut from Virgins, a program that had been going for 25 years. And the thing that often happens when budgets are tight is the first to go is programs in special ed and programs for kids who really need it the most. And I know that that's like a proposed budget, it's not like a definite thing or anything like that, but I just want to just make sure I speak to it just so the board knows that like it's making a difference for these kids. And programs like that will continue to make a difference, and programs like that are also continually going to be the ones that after like a 5-year cycle, even if it's working, will get cut. Because it's like, well, what do we do about the budget? Oh, let's get rid of that one. And so, yeah, just speaking up for the kids at this program who've really enjoyed it and really needed it. Originally it was proposed as a money-saving idea to the board by Nicole Carter as a way to avoid the residential programs that the county will have to pay for. A lot of these kids are one-on-one kids. And so just putting it out there. Just thinking about equity in our community and that our program has become a twofold thing, which is that we're helping these kids, but it's also a filter for everything that has gotten missed before that kid. So these are kids who are like 13 or 14, and things haven't been caught, like, oh, this kid's dyslexic, or oh, this kid has autism, or oh, wow, why didn't you catch this? So at least finding a way, if this program doesn't continue, to find a way to fill that need of like filtering what we're missing for these kids. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mo.
Yep. And no one online?
No one's their hand raised.
Okay. So next is our board reflections. Anyone wanna? I think we're all
I will
tired.
just say, thank you everybody for your stamina, especially members of the policy committee. I know how frustrating it must be to hear more comments, so I just thank you again for the work you're putting in.
Okay. Next is adjournment. Can I have a motion? Why are you looking at me? I sure thought I was the first one to.
I move we adjourn.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Jim, 'cause you're all